The chair exploded across his spine with enough force to kill a man half his age. Wood splinters rained down like shrapnel as the entire saloon went silent, waiting for the old stranger to crumble. He didn't. Instead, Elias Boone straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off dust, and turned to face Wade Crowley with eyes that had seen too much death to fear one more fight. "My turn," he said quietly. And in that terrible, frozen moment, everyone in that room understood they'd made a catastrophic mistake. If you want to see how far justice can reach and how one man's quiet rage changed an entire town, stay with me until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you what happened next. The whiskey in Elias Boone's glass barely rippled when the chair hit him. That should have been impossible. A full-grown man swinging hardwood with rage-fueled strength should have sent the old cowboy sprawling across the saloon floor, choking on blood and broken teeth. Should have ended the confrontation before it started. Should have taught the stranger what happened to people who wandered into Copperwood with soft words and steady eyes. Should have. Didn't. The sound was wrong first. Not the wet crack of ribs shattering, but the brittle explosion of cheap pine giving up against something that refused to break. Splinters scattered across the beer-stained floorboards. The chair's back separated from its seat, tumbling in opposite directions. And Elias Boone stood there at the bar, one hand still resting beside his glass, breathing steady as a man checking the morning weather. Wade Crowley held the chair's remnants in his fists, staring at them like they'd personally betrayed him. 6'3" of lean muscle and coiled violence, Wade had built his reputation on moments like these. Quick brutality, decisive action, the kind of enforcement that kept his brother's gambling operation running smooth, and kept the desperate folks of Copperwood too scared to complain about rigged games and impossible debts. "You..." Wade's voice came out strangled, confused. "You're supposed to be down." Elias rolled his shoulders, working out a kink that probably had nothing to do with the chair. Up close, you could see he wasn't as old as you'd first think. Maybe 60, maybe a hard 50. Weathered face, yes, with lines carved deep around the eyes and mouth. But those lines came from squinting into desert sun and smiling at private jokes, not age. His hair was steel gray, cut military short. His hands, resting calm against the bar top, showed scars across the knuckles that told their own stories. "That hurt," Elias said conversationally, like discussing a splinter. "Not much, but some." The Dusty Rose Saloon had gone graveyard quiet. 23 people packed into the space. Miners still dust-covered from the afternoon shift, professional gamblers with soft hands and calculating eyes, working girls in faded dresses leaning against the second-floor railing, the bartender Dutch, frozen mid-pour with a whiskey bottle suspended over a customer's glass. Everyone watching, everyone waiting to see if the laws of nature still applied, or if something fundamental had just broken. "You don't talk to me like that," Wade said, but the swagger had leaked out of his voice. "You don't walk into my brother's place and start spreading lies about..." "Wasn't lying." Elias turned fully now, facing Wade square. He moved like water, no wasted motion, each shift of weight perfectly balanced. "Your brother Marcus cheated Caleb McBride out of $300 2 weeks ago. Used a holdout device in his sleeve, spring-loaded card dispenser. Mechanics work, decent quality. Probably bought it in Denver." Wade's face flushed red. "You calling my brother a cheat?" "No." Elias picked up his whiskey, sipped it. Set it down. "I'm calling him a dead cheat. Past tense. Man who'd rig cards against desperate miners doesn't deserve present tense respect." The crowd shifted. A few sharp inhales. Someone near the piano muttered, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. Marcus Crowley had died 4 days ago, thrown from his horse on the road back from Silver Creek, neck broken clean. Tragic accident. That's what Wade had told everyone. That's what the town had accepted because you didn't question Wade Crowley, not if you wanted to keep your teeth and your livelihood. "You got a death wish, old man?" Wade's hand drifted toward his belt, where a Colt Peacemaker hung in a weathered holster. "Probably." Elias didn't look at the gun. "Most men my age do, in one form or another, but I won't die today, and I won't die to you. So let's skip past the posturing and get to the part where you make your actual decision." "My decision?" Wade barked out a laugh, harsh and bitter. I already made it when you opened your damn mouth. He came in fast. Credit where it's due, the man had training. Not the wild haymaker of a drunk brawler, but a proper fighter's approach. Lead jab to test distance, right? Cross-following behind with hip rotation and shoulder commitment. Textbook combination meant to snap the head back and set up the finishing hook. Elias slipped the jab by tilting his head 2 inches left. The cross he caught on a raised forearm that redirected the force past his ear. Then he stepped inside Wade's guard, too close for punches to generate power, and drove his palm into Wade's solar plexus. Not hard enough to drop him, but enough to empty his lungs and send him stumbling back 3 steps. "That's one," Elias said quietly. Wade wheezed, sucking air. His face cycled through shock, embarrassment, and fury in rapid succession. The crowd pressed closer, forming a loose circle. This was entertainment now. This was the kind of story you'd tell for years. "You son of a—" Wade charged again, this time abandoning technique for raw aggression. He swung wide, putting everything into a looping right hand meant to take Elias's head off. Elias ducked under it, let the momentum carry Wade past, and kicked his leading leg out from under him. Wade crashed into a poker table, scattering chips and cards. 2 gamblers scrambled clear, clutching their stakes. "That's 2. Stop counting!" Wade surged up, grabbing a whiskey bottle from the table. He swung it like a club. Elias caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it sharply until Wade's fingers spasmed open and the bottle dropped. Before it could hit the floor, Elias caught it in his other hand, set it gently on the nearest table, and drove his knee into Wade's gut. Wade folded, gasping. 3. I'm gonna... Wade couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't get enough air. "You're gonna what?" Elias asked. Not mocking, genuinely curious. "Beat me? Kill me? Make an example?" He released Wade's wrist, stepped back, gave him space. "You're not thinking clearly. You're fighting angry. And angry men make mistakes." Wade straightened, chest heaving. His face had gone from red to purple. "You don't know nothing about my brother." "I know he was desperate." Elias returned to the bar, reclaimed his whiskey. "I know he owed money to some folks in Denver who don't accept late payments. I know he was rigging games to cover his debts, and I know he got sloppy toward the end." That's how Caleb figured it out. Watched 3 straight hands where the cards fell too perfect, too convenient. "Caleb McBride's a goddamn liar," Wade spat. "Trash miner who can't accept he lost fair." "Caleb McBride," Elias said, voice hardening for the first time, "is a man with a wife and 2 daughters trying to survive on $40 a month. Your brother took food off his table, took the money he'd saved for winter supplies. You want to call that man a liar? Fine. But I was there when Caleb pawned his wedding ring to buy flour. I was there when his youngest went to bed hungry, so you better be damn sure about your accusations." The saloon had gone from quiet to dead silent. Even the piano player, who usually kept up a steady background melody regardless of fights or shootings, had stopped mid-chord. Wade looked around, seeing the faces. Some sympathetic to him. Men on his payroll, men who benefited from the Crowley brothers' operation. But others showing doubt. Miners who knew Caleb. Shopkeepers who'd extended credit to the McBride family. Working girls who'd seen the daughters come through town in threadbare dresses. "You're making people doubt," Wade said, voice low and dangerous. "That's your play. Turn folks against me, against my family's name. I'm telling the truth." Elias met his eyes. If that creates doubt, maybe there should be doubt. Wade moved faster than before. No telegraphing. He closed the distance in 2 long strides and threw a vicious uppercut aimed at Elias's jaw. Real power behind it. Real intent. Elias angled his body, let the punch glance off his shoulder, and countered with a short, brutal hook to Wade's floating ribs. The impact made a sick thud. Not the sharp crack of a break, but the deep, breathless collision of fist meeting unprotected flesh. Wade's knees buckled. 4. "Stop!" Wade gasped, clutching his side. "Stop damn counting." "Why?" Elias circled him slowly, hands loose at his sides. "You started this wanting to put me down. I'm just keeping score of how far you're falling short." Wade lunged, grabbing for Elias's shirt. He got a handful of dusty cotton and yanked hard, trying to pull the older man off balance. Elias moved with it instead of resisting, using Wade's own force to spin inside his guard. He hooked Wade's ankle with his boot and shoved him backward. Wade went down hard, back hitting the floor with enough force to rattle the bottles behind the bar. 5. The count was humiliation now. Public degradation. Every number another nail in Wade Crowley's reputation as the toughest enforcer in Copperwood. Men were starting to whisper. A few nervous laughs echoed from the back of the room. Wade lay there breathing hard, staring at the ceiling. For a moment, Elias thought maybe that was it. Maybe the younger man would recognize the futility, swallow his pride, walk away. Then Wade's hand moved to his belt. Don't. Elias's voice cut through the room like a whip crack. You pull that gun. This stops being a fight. Think real careful about your next choice. Wade's fingers wrapped around the Colt's grip. You embarrassed me, in front of everyone, in my brother's place. Your brother's dead. Elias said it flat, factual. This isn't his place anymore. An embarrassment heals. What comes next doesn't. Good. Wade drew the pistol, thumb cocking the hammer as it cleared leather. The room exploded into motion, people diving for cover, chairs scraping, someone screaming. But Elias didn't run, didn't even flinch. He moved forward inside the gun's arc before Wade could level it. His left hand clamped on Wade's wrist, controlling the weapon. His right hand struck Wade's elbow, hyperextending it with a sickening pop. The gun tumbled free. Elias caught it mid-fall, reversed it, and pressed the barrel up under Wade's jaw in one continuous motion. Everything stopped. Wade froze, eyes wide, feeling cold steel against his throat. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead. This is the moment, Elias said quietly, just for Wade to hear. This is where you learn something about yourself, about who you really are when the counting stops and the stakes go absolute. Wade's voice came out as a whisper. You gonna kill me? No. Why not? Because, Elias said, death would be mercy. And I don't think you deserve mercy. I think you deserve something harder. He stepped back, lowering the gun, ejected the cylinder, dumped the bullets onto the floor with a clatter of brass on wood, tossed the empty Colt at Wade's feet. You're gonna live with this, Elias continued. Every person in this room saw what happened, saw you pull a gun on an unarmed man, saw you lose anyway. That story spreads, and it will spread. Your reputation dies. The fear you traded on, the respect you demanded, gone. You'll wake up every morning knowing that when it mattered most, when you had every advantage, you still couldn't win. Wade stared at him, something breaking behind his eyes. That's your punishment, Elias said, living with defeat. He walked back to the bar, finished his whiskey in one swallow, and set the glass down with a soft clink. The crowd parted as he moved toward the door. Nobody spoke. Nobody met his eyes. The working girls upstairs had gone still as statues. Dutch, the bartender, stood with his mouth slightly open, whiskey bottle forgotten in his hand. Elias paused at the threshold, turned back. Caleb McBride lives in the shack behind Miller's feed store. The money Marcus took from him, $300. I'd suggest someone makes that right. If it doesn't show up by tomorrow sunset, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be this patient. He stepped out into the late afternoon sun, leaving Wade Crowley on the floor surrounded by bullet casings and shattered pride. The door swung closed behind him. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, the saloon returned to life. Whispered conversations, nervous laughter, the scrape of chairs being righted. Dutch finally poured the drink he'd been holding midair, hands shaking slightly. Wade pushed himself to sitting, back against the overturned poker table. His ribs ached, his elbow throbbed. His pride lay in pieces around him, shattered more completely than the chair had been. A figure approached, tall, thin, dressed in a black suit that had seen better days. Reverend Thomas Aldridge, one of the few men in Copperwood who'd stand up to the Crowleys when conscience demanded it. You should have left it alone, the Reverend said quietly, not unkindly. Whatever your brother did, whatever debts he left, they're not yours to pay in blood. Wade looked up at him. Who is he? That old man? Don't know. Rode into town 3 days ago on a gray mare, took a room at the boarding house. Hasn't caused trouble till now. The Reverend paused. But I've seen men like him before. During the war, after the war. Men who carry violence the way most people carry their name, just part of who they are, can't be separated from it, no matter how they try. He could have killed me. Yes. Why didn't he? The Reverend considered that. Maybe because killing you would have been easier. What he did instead, letting you live with this, that's harder. For you and for him. Wade retrieved his empty gun, stared at it. 6 months ago, this Colt had made him somebody. Now it was just metal and wood, powerless as the man holding it. My father's going to hear about this, Wade said. I expect so. He's not going to let it stand. The Reverend sighed. No, I don't imagine he will. And that's what worries me. Outside, Elias walked down Copperwood's main street, if you could call it that. More like a wide dirt road with wooden structures clinging to either side, slowly being reclaimed by the desert that surrounded them. The town existed for one reason: copper. The mine employed 200 men, paid poorly, worked them hard, and made 3 rich families back east richer. The boarding house sat at the far end of town, a 2-story structure that leaned slightly to the left. Mrs. Henderson ran it, widow of a mine foreman who died in a collapse 5 years back. She kept the rooms clean, asked few questions, and had a gift for knowing when to be deaf to her tenants' business. Elias climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, entered room 7. Sparse furnishings, narrow bed, washstand, single chair by the window. His saddlebags lay on the floor, his rifle, a Winchester .73, leaning in the corner. He'd traveled light for 15 years now. Anything more than what fit on his horse felt like anchors trying to pull him down, make him stay places he shouldn't stay. He poured water from the pitcher into the basin, washed the sawdust and blood from his hands. Not his blood, Wade's, from when his knuckles split against Elias's ribs. The impact had hurt, the chair, the punches, all of it. He wasn't some supernatural being who felt no pain. He was just practiced at not showing it, at continuing to function when hurt became the baseline condition. A knock at the door. Elias dried his hands, checked his reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Same face he'd had for 20 years now, same scars, same eyes that had seen too much and somehow kept seeing more. It's open. The door swung inward. Caleb McBride stood there, hat in hands, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. Thin to the point of gaunt, with a miner's permanent stoop and hands calloused raw. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell when life ground people down. Mr. Boone, Caleb said. I heard what happened at the Rose. News travels fast. Always does when it's good news. Caleb stepped inside, closed the door behind him. I wanted to thank you for what you said, for standing up when nobody else would. Don't thank me yet. Elias sat in the chair, gestured for Caleb to take the bed. What I did might have made things worse for you. Worse than my daughter's going hungry? Caleb's voice cracked. Worse than watching my wife pretend she's not afraid while we burn through the last of our savings? I don't see how it gets worse than that. Elias had heard this story before, in a dozen different towns with a dozen different names attached. Good man, hard worker. Does everything right, plays by the rules, and the rules chew him up anyway. The game was rigged. Not just Marcus Crowley's poker table, but the whole damn system. Company store prices, mine wages, the interest rates on loans, all designed to keep people trapped, desperate, dependent. Tell me exactly what happened, Elias said. The night Marcus cheated you. Caleb sat on the bed's edge, turning his hat in his hands. It was 2 weeks ago, Friday night. I just got paid, $43 for the month. I was supposed to buy supplies, put some aside for winter. But Tommy Carson told me about a game at the Rose, said Marcus was running it straight, honest stakes. Tommy Carson works for Wade. Yeah, I know that now. Caleb's jaw tightened. I should have known it then, but I was desperate. Winter's coming, we're behind on everything, and I thought maybe I could turn 40 into 100, give my girls a decent Christmas. How much did you start with? Put down 20, played conservative at first, won a few small hands, got up to about 35. Then Marcus suggested we raise the stakes, make it interesting. I should have walked away, should have taken my $15 profit and been happy. But you didn't. No. Caleb looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I went all in on a full house, kings over tens, best hand I'd seen all night. Marcus had 3 queens showing. I was sure I had him. Let me guess, Elias said. River card gave him a 4th queen. Caleb nodded. Drew it clean. 1 card, perfect timing. I lost everything. Then I was stupid enough to ask if he'd extend credit. He said sure, friendly as could be. Let me borrow another 100. I lost that too, chasing my losses like a damn fool. He was stringing you along, letting you win just enough to keep you hooked, then pulling the rug when you were in too deep. I figured that out later, after I pawned Sarah's ring, after I sat my girls down and told them why we couldn't buy flour. Caleb's voice went hollow. You know what the worst part is? They didn't cry. They just nodded and said they understood, like they'd been expecting it, like disappointment was normal. Elias stood, moved to the window. Outside, the sun was settling toward the western ridgeline, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful country, if you ignored the ugliness of what people did to each other in it. Marcus is dead, Elias said. The money he took is gone, probably already spent on his debt. Wade's not going to give it back out of guilt or conscience. I know. But there are other ways to make things right. Caleb looked up. What do you mean? Marcus kept records, ledgers, every game, every debt, every transaction. He wrote it down. Men like him always do. They need to know exactly how much they're stealing, need to track their lies in case they get complicated. How do you know that? Because, Elias said, I've known 100 men like Marcus Crowley. They're predictable. They follow patterns. Where would he keep these ledgers? His room above the saloon, most likely, or his office at the lumber yard. Wade runs that now. Caleb stood. You're saying we should steal them. I'm saying they exist. What happens to them is up to you. If I get caught, you won't go alone. Elias turned from the window. I'll help. But understand what you're signing up for. This doesn't end with recovering some paper. The Crowleys have connections. Wade's father, William Crowley, owns half the businesses in Copperwood and most of the land around it. You go after Marcus's reputation, you're going after the family, and they will retaliate. They're already killing us. Caleb's voice went hard. Just slow enough that nobody notices. Wage cuts, price increases, accidents that aren't quite accidents when union talk starts. You think I don't know how this ends if I do nothing? My daughters starve or I work myself to death in that mine. Either way, the Crowleys win. Elias studied him, saw the desperation, yes, but also something else, a spark of the anger that kept men alive when everything else told them to quit. All right, Elias said. Tonight, after midnight, when the town's asleep, we go through Marcus's things, find the ledgers, and we document every crime he committed. Then we take that evidence somewhere it can't be buried. Where? The sheriff works for William Crowley. The territorial marshal doesn't. Neither does the newspaper in Silver Creek. We get enough proof, make enough noise, even the Crowleys can't silence it. Caleb nodded slowly. Okay. Yes. Let's do it. Go home. Kiss your wife and daughters. Don't tell them what we're planning. What they don't know can't hurt them if things go wrong. Meet me behind the lumber yard at midnight. Dress dark. Bring work gloves. Mr. Boone. Elias. Elias. Caleb extended his hand. I don't know why you're doing this. Don't know what you get out of it, but thank you. Really? Elias shook his hand. The grip was strong despite everything, despite the hunger and the fear and the weight of impossible odds. Some men broke under pressure. Others hardened. Thank me when your daughters have food, Elias said. After Caleb left, Elias lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Old habits died hard. He couldn't sleep before an operation, couldn't quiet his mind enough. So he ran through the plan, checking for weak points, anticipating complications. The truth was he didn't know why he was doing this. Not really. 3 days ago, he'd ridden into Copperwood planning to pass through, maybe rest the mare, resupply, and continue west. No intention of getting involved. Never any intention of getting involved. Then he'd seen Caleb McBride at the general store, counting pennies, asking Mrs. Jameson if she'd extend credit for flour and beans. Seen the shopkeeper's face, sympathy and cruelty wrestling for dominance, sympathy losing. Seen Caleb walk out empty-handed, shoulders slumped with the special defeat of a man who can't feed his children. Elias had followed him. Don't know why. Just did. Followed him to the shack behind Miller's feed store, saw the 2 girls playing in the dirt yard with a rope doll, saw Caleb go inside and emerge minutes later with a small cloth bundle. Watched him walk to the pawn shop, emerge without the bundle but with a few folded bills. That night, Elias had gone to the pawn shop after hours, picked the lock, another old habit, and retrieved the contents of Caleb's bundle. A simple gold band, wedding ring, inscription inside, Sarah and Caleb forever. The kind of promise people make when they're young and stupid and haven't learned how the world breaks promises. He'd left money, enough to cover the pawn plus interest, and taken the ring. Then he'd started asking questions. Quiet questions. Bought drinks for loose-lipped minors, played cards with men who knew things. Pieced together the story of Marcus Crowley's operation. And here he was. Again. Like always. Can't stop himself from tilting at windmills that aren't his to tilt at. The room darkened as the sun completed its descent. Elias lit the oil lamp on the table, checked his pocket watch. 8:30. 3.5 hours until midnight. He cleaned his Winchester methodically, ran an oiled cloth down the barrel, checked the action, verified the magazine was loaded. Wouldn't need it tonight, at least shouldn't need it. Breaking into a dead man's room wasn't combat, but preparation was reflex now, automatic as breathing. At 11:45, he extinguished the lamp and slipped out through the boarding house's back door. Mrs. Henderson was asleep. He could hear her snoring through the thin walls of her ground-floor room. The town lay quiet under a half-moon, most buildings dark. Light spilled from the dusty rows, but that was normal. The saloon ran late, catering to the second-shift miners who needed whiskey more than sleep. Elias moved through the shadows, avoiding the main street, took the long route, circling through the alleys and backways he'd mapped during his first day in town. Another habit: always know 3 ways in and 3 ways out. Always have a route nobody's watching. The lumberyard sat on Copperwood's northern edge, where the town surrendered to open desert. Stacks of pine and cedar planks, coils of rope, barrels of nails and hardware. All the materials needed to build the structures that would house the people who'd tear copper from the earth, so rich men back east could get richer. Caleb waited in the shadows behind a stack of timber, dressed in dark clothes, work gloves on. He jumped when Elias approached. "Relax," Elias whispered. "It's me." "Sorry, I'm not used to this." "Good. That means you're still human." Elias surveyed the yard. Marcus's office is in the back building, 2nd floor. Wade lives there now, likely asleep, but we move quiet anyway. They crossed the yard, boots silent on packed earth. The office building was newer than most in Copperwood, painted white, glass windows intact, a roof that didn't leak. Money-bought maintenance. The door was locked. Elias pulled a set of picks from his pocket, another relic from a past he didn't talk about, and worked the mechanism. 30 seconds, a soft click, and they were inside. The lower floor was administrative space, desks, filing cabinets, accounting ledgers for the legitimate business. Elias had no interest in those. They climbed the stairs, wincing at every creak. Wade's room was at the end of the hall. Light showed under the door, lamp still burning or early riser, impossible to tell. They moved past it to the corner room that had been Marcus's. This door was unlocked. Sloppy. But then, Marcus was dead. What did security matter? Inside, the room was half cleared. Marcus's personal effects still scattered around, clothes in the wardrobe, books on a shelf, bottles of expensive whiskey on the dresser. But the bed was stripped, the desk cleared. Wade had started processing his brother's things but hadn't finished. Elias closed the door, lit a small candle he'd brought, less light than a lamp, less likely to be noticed. He and Caleb worked systematically, checked the desk drawers, empty, checked under the mattress. Nothing. Checked behind the wardrobe, dust. "Maybe there's nothing here," Caleb whispered. "There's always something." Elias knelt, examined the floorboards. Most were flush, nailed tight. But near the bed, one board sat slightly higher than its neighbors. He pulled out his knife, wedged it into the gap, and pried. The board came up, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside, a metal lockbox. Elias lifted it out, set it on the desk. The lock was simple, cheaper than it should have been for what it protected. He picked it in under a minute. The box held 3 things: a stack of cash, maybe $200, a collection of iOS and promissory notes, and 2 leather-bound ledgers. Caleb reached for the cash. Elias caught his wrist. "That's not yours," Elias said quietly. "Marcus stole from me, and taking this makes you a thief. Is that what you want? To become what he was?" Caleb pulled his hand back, breathing hard. You're right. Sorry. I just... Seeing it there, knowing what it could mean for my family. I know. Elias opened the first ledger, angled it toward the candlelight. Columns of names, dates, amounts. Marcus's handwriting, neat, methodical. Every game documented, every win and loss recorded. And beside many entries, notes. Mechanic used, sleeve holdout. Bottom dealing, second hand. False shuffle, maintained stack. Marcus had documented his own cheating, probably as insurance or blackmail material. The second ledger was worse. Loans extended. Interest rates that violated territorial usury laws. Threats made, payments extracted. And at the back, a list of names with the notation silenced beside them. Jesus, Caleb breathed, reading over Elias's shoulder. These people, some of them disappeared. We thought they left town, moved on. Maybe they did, Elias said. Or maybe they're buried in the desert and nobody thought to look. A sound from the hallway, footsteps approaching fast. Elias blew out the candle, grabbed the ledgers, shoved them inside his coat. The lockbox went back under the floorboard, the board pressed into place. He pulled Caleb behind the wardrobe just as the door slammed open. Wade Crowley stood silhouetted in the doorframe, lamp in one hand, pistol in the other. He'd thrown on pants, but his chest was bare, hair disheveled from sleep. I know you're in here, Wade said. Heard the floorboards creak. Elias held a finger to his lips, signaling Caleb to stay silent. Wade stepped into the room, swinging the lamp left and right. Come out now. Maybe I don't shoot you. Make me search. I'll put a bullet in you and claim self-defense. Intruder in my building, dead of night. Sheriff won't even ask questions. The lamp's glow swept closer to their hiding spot. Another few seconds and Wade would see them. Elias made a decision. He stepped out from behind the wardrobe, hands visible and empty. Evening, Wade. Wade spun, bringing the gun up. You should have known. Should have locked your front door. What are you doing here? Looking for truth. Found it too. Elias nodded toward the replaced floorboard. Your brother kept good records. Very thorough. Wade's eyes flicked to the floor, then back to Elias. You took something. I did. Give it back. No. Wade cocked the pistol. I will shoot you. Maybe. But then you'd have to explain why. Have to tell your father, tell the sheriff, tell everyone what you were protecting. And once people start looking into Marcus's business, all those records in that lockbox come to light. Even the ones I didn't take. Wade's jaw worked. He was trapped. Shoot Elias and face questions he couldn't answer, or let him go and lose control of the narrative. You're making a mistake, Wade finally said. My father has resources, connections. You think you can expose Marcus and walk away clean? I've made bigger mistakes. Elias moved toward the door, slowly, no sudden movements. Survived most of them. I'll take my chances with your father. He'll kill you. A lot of men have tried. I'm still here, they're not. Elias reached the doorway, Wade tracking him with the gun the whole way. Behind the wardrobe, Caleb remained frozen, barely breathing. This isn't over, Wade said. No, Elias agreed. It's just starting, and that's what scares you, because you know how it ends. Same way it always ends when the truth comes out. The powerful fall, and everyone underneath remembers they don't have to stay underneath. He walked into the hall, down the stairs, out into the night. Didn't run. Running would have triggered Wade's predator instinct. Instead, he moved steady, purposeful, a man with nothing to hide and nowhere to run to. Behind him, the lamplight in Marcus's window flickered and died. Seconds later, footsteps. Wade going back to his room. The confrontation was over. For now. Elias circled back to the lumberyard's rear. Caleb emerged from the building minutes later, pale and shaking. I thought we were dead, Caleb said. When he came in, I thought, but you're not. You kept quiet, stayed hidden. That took discipline. What do we do now? Wade knows we were there, he'll tell his father. Let him. Elias patted his coat where the ledgers rested. By the time William Crowley acts, this information will be spread far enough that killing us won't bury it. That's the insurance. Make the truth bigger than any one person. They walked through the sleeping town, taking different routes to avoid being seen together. At the split where Caleb would head toward the shack and Elias toward the boarding house, they paused. "Get some sleep," Elias said. "Tomorrow I take these to Silver Creek, get them to the newspaper. They'll want to verify the information, probably take a few days to investigate. During that time, keep your head down. Don't talk about tonight. Act normal." Normal. Caleb laughed, brittle and desperate. "I don't even remember what that means anymore." "It means you wake up, you work, you come home, you hug your daughters, and you wait. Can you do that?" "Yeah, I can do that." "Good man." Elias turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. When this breaks, when the story hits and people start choosing sides, some folks won't believe it. They'll call it lies, defend the Crowleys, because it's easier than accepting they've been complicit. You need to be ready for that. For friends turning into enemies. For the town splitting apart." Caleb nodded slowly. "I know, but at least we'll have a chance. That's more than we had yesterday." They parted ways. Elias made it back to the boarding house, climbed to his room. Inside, he spread the ledgers on the small desk, lit the lamp, and began reading in detail. The extent of Marcus Crowley's operation was worse than he'd thought. Dozens of names, hundreds of dollars stolen through rigged games, loans with interest rates that compounded monthly, designed to trap people in permanent debt. And those names at the back, silenced. There were 12 of them. 12 people who'd threatened to expose Marcus, or couldn't pay, or knew too much. 12 people who'd vanished. Maybe they left town. Maybe. Elias copied the most damning information into a separate notebook, his own insurance in case the original ledgers were seized or destroyed. Detailed notes, names, dates, amounts, specific methods of cheating, witness statements he'd gathered from minors willing to talk off the record. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking. Golden light crept across the windowsill, warming the cold wood floor. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. The town was waking up to another day of pretending everything was fine. Elias closed the ledgers, stacked them with his copied notes, and wrapped everything in oilcloth. This afternoon, he'd ride to Silver Creek, 20 miles northwest, far enough that William Crowley's influence was diluted. The Silver Creek Gazette had a reputation for independent journalism, a rarity in territories where most newspapers served as mouthpieces for mine owners and land barons. But first, sleep, a few hours at least. His body was demanding payment for the night's work, for the confrontation with Wade, for the sustained tension of breaking and entering. He lay on the bed fully clothed, boots on, Winchester within arm's reach. Another habit from another life. Sleep light. Sleep ready. Trust nothing. His eyes had just closed when another knock rattled the door. Elias sat up, hand moving to the rifle. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Henderson, you've got a visitor. Tell them I'm sleeping." "I did. He says it's urgent. Says his name is Reverend Aldridge, and you'll want to hear what he has to say." Elias sighed, stood. His body protested, joints stiff, muscles sore from the fight. He was getting too old for this. Had been getting too old for this for 10 years now. He opened the door. The Reverend stood in the hallway, hat in hands, looking grim. "What?" Elias asked. "William Crowley arrived in town an hour ago. He's at the Rose right now, gathering men. Word is he's coming for you." "Let him come." "You don't understand. William's not like Wade or Marcus. He's smarter, more patient, and he's got the law in his pocket. Sheriff Daniels already has a warrant for your arrest. Assault, destruction of property, trespassing. They're going to take you legally, put you in a cell, and then accidents happen in cells." Elias leaned against the doorframe. "So you're suggesting I run?" "I'm suggesting you disappear for a few days. Give this time to cool down. Give me time to talk to people, build support. There are folks in this town who'd stand with you if they had the courage. But they need time to find that courage. Time is what William wants. Time to destroy evidence, time to silence witnesses, time to craft his story. I give him that, and this whole thing dies." "If you stay, you might die," the Reverend said flatly. "Is that really better?" Elias considered it. The smart play was obvious. Ride out now, take the ledgers to Silver Creek, publish the story, then vanish. Let the law and public opinion fight it out while he moved on to the next town, the next fight, the next futile stand against entropy and evil. But Caleb McBride was still here. His wife and daughters were still here. All the people Marcus had cheated, all the families Wade had terrorized, they were here. And if Elias ran, William Crowley would take his frustration out on them. "I'm staying," Elias said. The Reverend closed his eyes briefly. "I was afraid you'd say that. Get word to the newspaper in Silver Creek. Tell them what's happening. Tell them if anything happens to me, the story's in my saddlebags, room 7, Henderson's boarding house. Make sure that information reaches at least 3 people, journalists, lawyers, someone who can act on it." "I will." The Reverend paused. "For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing. Or at least, a right thing. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Isn't it, though?" After the Reverend left, Elias washed his face, changed shirts, strapped on his gun belt. If William Crowley wanted a confrontation, he'd get one, but it would be public, witnessed, impossible to cover up. He walked downstairs, found Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "You're leaving today, aren't you?" she asked without looking up from the eggs she was frying. "Why do you say that?" "Because trouble's coming, and men like you don't wait around for trouble. You either run toward it or away from it, but you never just sit." "Perceptive. I've run a boarding house for 15 years. You learn to read people." She flipped an egg expertly. "You paid through the end of the week. I'll keep your room available in case you need it." "I appreciate that." "Don't appreciate it. Just survive. I've had 3 men die on me. My husband, my brother, my son. I'm tired of funerals." Elias took the plate of eggs and toast she offered, sat at the small kitchen table. The food was good, simple, honest cooking that tasted like care. He ate slowly, savoring it, aware this might be the last peaceful meal he had for a while. Through the kitchen window, he could see the main street. People were gathering, more than usual for a Friday morning. Word had spread. The whole town knew something was coming. Elias finished his breakfast, thanked Mrs. Henderson, and stepped outside into the growing crowd. They parted for him, some with respect, some with fear, some with the carefully neutral expression of people who hadn't yet decided which side of history to stand on. At the center of the crowd, in front of the Dusty Rose Saloon, William Crowley waited. He was nothing like his sons. Where Wade was tall and Marcus had been lean, William was built like a bull, broad shoulders, thick neck, hands that looked like they'd spent decades swinging hammers before they started signing checks. 60 years old, but hard with it. The kind of hard that came from surviving everything the frontier threw at you and deciding you'd never be vulnerable again. Sheriff Daniels stood beside him, a weak-chinned man in an ill-fitting uniform, badge polished, but authority borrowed. "Elias Boone," William called out, voice carrying across the street. "You're under arrest for assault, trespassing, and theft." Elias stopped 20 feet away, hands loose at his sides. "On whose complaint?" "Mine. You attacked my son, broke into my property, and stole documents that don't belong to you." "Your son attacked me with a chair. I defended myself. The room I entered belonged to your dead son. No lock on the door, no sign saying keep out. And the documents I took prove systematic fraud and possibly murder. So which crime would you like to focus on?" The crowd murmured. People were listening, weighing the words. William's expression didn't change. "The law doesn't care about your justifications. Sheriff Daniels has a warrant. You'll come with him, stand trial, and we'll let a judge sort out your accusations." "A judge you appointed, in a court you control, with a jury pulled from people who depend on your businesses for their livelihoods. That's not justice. That's theater. It's what we have." William stepped forward. "You don't like it. You should have stayed wherever you came from. This is my town. These are my people, and you're just passing through." "Your people," Elias repeated, "like their property, like their family. Like I've built something here that works, and you're trying to tear it down with lies, and I'm not lying." The voice came from the crowd. Caleb McBride pushed forward, face flushed with anger and fear. "Marcus cheated me. I've got witnesses. I've got proof now thanks to Mr. Boone. Your son was a thief and a fraud, and if you can't accept that, then you're just as bad as he was." The crowd shifted again. More murmurs. A few nods. William looked at Caleb like he was something stuck to his boot. "You're a disgruntled gambler who lost money he couldn't afford and now wants someone to blame. That's all this is." "I'm a father trying to feed his children." Caleb's voice cracked. I'm a man who worked every day for 20 years and still can't make ends meet because people like you and your sons rigged the system. You want to arrest someone? Arrest yourself for running this town like a prison." Sheriff Daniels moved toward Caleb. "That's enough. You're disturbing the Psst. Let him speak." Reverend Aldridge appeared beside Caleb. "This is still America, last I checked. Man has a right to speak his mind." "Not when he's slandering the dead," William said. "Marcus can't defend himself anymore, so I'll defend him. My son was an honest businessman who—" "Your son kept ledgers documenting every crime he committed." Elias reached inside his coat, pulled out the copied notes. "Every rigged game, every illegal loan, every threat. It's all here in his handwriting, and tomorrow it'll be in the Silver Creek Gazette for everyone to read." William's composure finally cracked. His face went red, veins standing out on his forehead. "You have no right. Those are private documents. They're evidence of crimes, and once crimes are committed, privacy doesn't protect you anymore." "Sheriff," William barked, "arrest him. Now." Daniels pulled his revolver, hands shaking. "You're under arrest. Put your hands up." Elias didn't move. "You really want to do this? Pull a gun on an unarmed man in front of 100 witnesses? Think about how that looks." "You're not unarmed," Daniels said. "You've got a gun on your hip. So do half the men here. Wearing a gun isn't a crime. Haven't drawn it, haven't threatened anyone. All I've done is tell the truth." "The truth," William spat. "You don't know anything about truth. You rode into my town, stirred up trouble, turned people against each other. You're a goddamn anarchist, that's what you are. Probably a union agitator, probably working for my competitors." "I'm working for myself," Elias said quietly. "Same as I've always done. And right now, that work involves making sure Caleb McBride gets justice. Making sure everyone your sons hurt gets their story heard. That's all." Noble words from a man with blood on his hands. William smiled, cold and sharp. "Oh yes, I've been asking around, making inquiries. You think I don't have resources? I know who you are, Elias Boone. Or should I say Captain Boone? Army deserter, wanted in 4 territories for acts committed during the war. You're not some righteous crusader. You're a criminal hiding behind morality." The crowd reaction was mixed, some people stepping back from Elias, others moving closer. The revelation created space for doubt, for second-guessing. Elias felt the weight of it. The past, catching up, always catching up. "I never claimed to be innocent," Elias said. "Never pretended my hands were clean. I did things in the war I'm not proud of. Deserted when I couldn't stomach the orders anymore. And yes, I've broken laws since then, when the law was wrong. But none of that changes what Marcus did. None of that makes the ledgers false." "It makes you an unreliable witness," William countered. "Makes everything you say suspect." "Who's going to believe a deserter? A wanted man? When this goes to court, and it will, your testimony will be worthless. Then let the ledgers speak for themselves. Ledgers you stole and inadmissible in court, fruit of the poisoned tree." William was smiling now, confident again. "You've got nothing, Boone. Nothing but accusations and a criminal record. Sheriff, take him." Daniels moved forward, gun extended. The crowd tensed. Some people were already backing away, not wanting to be part of what happened next. Elias remained still, calculating. He could draw, faster than Daniels, probably faster than anyone here, but shooting a sheriff, even a corrupt one, would make him the villain in this story. Would turn public opinion, give William the excuse to crack down harder. Sometimes the smart fight was no fight at all. He raised his hand slowly. "All right, I'll come peacefully, but I want it noted for everyone here that I'm surrendering under protest. This is not justice. This is power protecting itself." Daniels approached, reaching for handcuffs. His hands were still shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew this was wrong, knew he was betraying his badge. But fear of William Crowley was stronger than fear of his own conscience. The cuffs clicked shut around Elias's wrists. "Take him to the jail," William ordered. "Lock him up secure. And someone get those stolen documents from him." Daniels reached for the notes in Elias's coat. But before he could grab them, Caleb darted forward and snatched them. "These aren't stolen," Caleb said, backing away. "These are copies, evidence of crimes. And if you try to take them from me, that's destruction of evidence. That's a felony." "Give them here," William growled. "No." Caleb held the papers against his chest. I'm taking these to Silver Creek. I'm going to the newspaper and the territorial marshal. And if anything happens to me, if I have an accident or disappear, that just proves we were right." William looked at Daniels. Daniels looked at William. The silent communication was clear. We could take them by force, but not here. Not now. Not with everyone watching. "Go then," William finally said. "Run to Silver Creek. Tell your stories. It won't matter. I'll have Boone tried and convicted before your newspaper even prints a word. And without him to corroborate your accusations, you're just a disgruntled miner with a grudge." "We'll see," Caleb said. He looked at Elias. "I won't let this be for nothing." Elias nodded. "Make sure you don't travel alone. Take the Reverend with you. Take anyone willing to witness." "I'll go," a voice called out. Then another. "Me too." "And me." 5 people stepped forward. Miners, a shopkeeper's wife, one of the working girls from the saloon. People who'd been silent, who'd been afraid, now finding courage in numbers. William watched his control slipping, saw the town's loyalty fracturing in real time. His face hardened. "This isn't over," he said quietly, just for Elias to hear. "No," Elias agreed. "It's just beginning." They led him toward the jail, a small stone building at the town's edge, iron bars on the windows, a reputation for being where inconvenient people disappeared. Elias went without resistance, filing away every detail: the position of the guards, the route from the jail to the main street, the sight lines, the blind spots, the structural weak points. Because William Crowley was right about one thing: this wasn't over. And Elias had been in worse prisons than this. The cell smelled like old sweat and despair. Elias sat on the narrow wooden bench that passed for a bed, back against the cold stone wall, watching a cockroach navigate the floor with more freedom than he currently possessed. The handcuffs had come off once Sheriff Daniels shoved him inside and slammed the iron door shut, but the bars were just as effective at keeping him contained. Through the single window, barely large enough to fit his head through, he could see a slice of Copperwood's main street. People moved past in clusters, their voices carrying fragments of conversation. Most were talking about him, about the arrest, about whether he was a hero or a troublemaker, whether the Crowleys were corrupt or just misunderstood, whether anything would actually change, or if this was just another dust-up that would blow over like all the others. Fear and hope were having a fistfight in the town's collective consciousness, and Elias couldn't tell which one was winning. The sun climbed higher, turning the cell into an oven. Sweat soaked through Elias's shirt. Daniels had taken his gun belt, his knife, even his pocket watch. Standard procedure, he'd claimed, though Elias suspected it was more about humiliation than safety. Strip a man of his possessions, and you strip him of identity. Make him feel small, make him feel powerless. Didn't work on Elias. He'd been powerless before, in worse places than this. A Confederate prison camp in Georgia where men died daily from dysentery and starvation. A stockade in Kansas after he'd deserted, before he'd managed to escape. Compared to those, this cell was almost comfortable. Almost. Footsteps approached from outside, heavy boots on packed earth. The door to the jail's outer office creaked open, and voices drifted through, Sheriff Daniels and someone else. Someone whose voice carried weight and certainty. William Crowley. "I want to see him," William was saying. "Sir, I don't think that's... I don't care what you think, Sheriff. Open the door." A pause. Then keys jangling, the scrape of metal on metal. The inner door swung open and William Crowley stepped into the cell block, filling the narrow corridor with his presence. He studied Elias through the bars like a man examining livestock at auction, assessing value, looking for weaknesses. "Comfortable?" William asked. "I've had worse accommodations." "I'm sure you have. Men like you always do." William pulled a cigar from his vest pocket, bit off the end, struck a match against the stone wall. The sulfur smell filled the small space. "I wanted to talk to you before things get complicated. Threatening a prisoner, bold move. No threat, just conversation. Man to man." William puffed the cigar until it glowed orange. "You're smart, Boone, smarter than you've been acting. Smart enough to know this crusade of yours ends badly." "For who?" "For everyone. You think you're helping Caleb McBride? You've painted a target on his back. Same for anyone who stands with you. My reach extends beyond Copperwood, beyond this territory. I can make life very difficult for people who cross me. Elias stood, moved to the bars, close enough to smell the expensive tobacco, the even more expensive cologne. So this is the part where you offer me a deal. Leave town, keep quiet, and maybe nobody gets hurt. Not quite. William smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm offering you a chance to tell the truth. Admit you fabricated evidence. Admit you were working for my competitors, the Denver Mining Consortium that's been trying to buy me out for years. Admit this whole thing was a setup, and I'll make sure your trial is fair. Lenient sentence, maybe just a year or two. You're what, 60? You'd survive it. And if I don't? Then I stop being generous. Then we talk about all those warrants you've been dodging. Federal charges from your desertion. That killing in Arizona, yes, I know about that too. The deputy you shot when he tried to arrest you. Self-defense, you claimed, but witnesses say different. I can make sure all of those come back to haunt you. Can make sure you hang before you ever see trial for what happened here. Elias met his gaze without flinching. You're scared. William's smile faltered. Excuse me? You're scared. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here offering deals. You just let the law handle it. But you know what Caleb's carrying to Silver Creek. Know what's in those ledgers, and you're terrified it'll stick. I'm not. Your son documented everything. Every crime, every shakedown. He was meticulous. Probably learned it from you. Keep records, maintain control. But that same instinct that made him good at stealing made him vulnerable. Because now all that evidence exists, and destroying it doesn't destroy the truth. Too many people know. Too many people saw. William's hand tightened on the bars. The cigar trembled slightly. My son is dead. You want to tarnish his memory with lies. Your son was a criminal. And instead of accepting that, instead of using his death as a chance to make things right, you're doubling down, protecting his reputation at the cost of everyone he hurt. He was my blood! The shout echoed in the small space. For a moment, William's composure cracked completely, revealing the grief underneath. Not grief for the lives Marcus ruined, but grief for the son he'd lost, the legacy that was crumbling. I know what it's like to lose people, Elias said quietly. I know what it's like to want to protect their memory, but you can't build justice on a foundation of lies. It doesn't hold. William stepped back, regaining control. The mask slipped back into place, hard, certain, untouchable. You think you're righteous. You think you're on the side of angels. But you're just another killer with a story. And when they put the rope around your neck, nobody's going to remember your reasons. They'll just remember you died. He turned to leave, paused at the door. My offer expires when Caleb reaches Silver Creek. After that, we do this the hard way. We're already doing it the hard way. William left without responding. The outer door slammed shut. Footsteps receding. Then silence, broken only by the buzz of flies and the distant sounds of town life continuing without him. Elias returned to the bench, sat down. His body was starting to catalog all the small miseries of confinement, the hard wood pressing into his spine, the hunger gnawing at his stomach, the thirst making his throat raw. Daniels hadn't offered water or food. Probably wouldn't until he had to. Petty cruelty, but effective. Time crawled. The sun moved across the sky in increments so small they seemed imaginary. Elias counted the stones in the wall, 247 visible from where he sat. Counted the bars, 12 vertical, 6 horizontal. Counted his breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Meditation techniques learned from a Chinese railroad worker years ago, when Elias had been younger and still believed he could outrun his past. Turns out you couldn't. The past had long legs and infinite patience. Voices outside again. Different this time. Angry. A crowd gathering. Elias moved to the window, angled his head to see. 30 or 40 people clustered in the street outside the jail. Miners mostly, still in their work clothes, faces streaked with dust. But others too. Shopkeepers, a few women, some of the working girls from the saloon. They weren't holding torches or weapons. Weren't shouting for blood. Just standing there, silent, staring at the building where Elias was held. Sheriff Daniels emerged from the office, hand on his gun. Disperse. All of you. This is an unlawful assembly. Nobody moved. I said disperse. You're obstructing. We're standing on a public street, a voice called out. Elias recognized it. Tom Briggs, one of the miners who'd been at the saloon during the fight with Wade. Last I checked, that's not illegal. You're intimidating law enforcement. We're not doing anything, just standing here, waiting. Waiting for what? To see if justice happens, or if this is just another Crowley cover-up. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face reddened. His hand tightened on the gun, but he didn't draw. Shooting unarmed citizens in broad daylight would be hard to justify, even in Copperwood. You've got 5 minutes to clear out, Daniel said, voice cracking slightly, or I start making arrests. For what crime exactly? Another voice. Elias couldn't place this one. Young, female, educated. We're peacefully assembled. We're not threatening anyone. The Constitution protects our right to... This isn't Denver, Miss Carter. We don't have constitutional rights out here. We have order, and I'm the one who maintains it. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Miss Carter, whoever she was, stepped forward from the crowd. Mid-20s, wearing a simple dress, but carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd been educated back east. The law should protect everyone, not just the people who can afford to buy it. The crowd's murmur grew louder, supportive, emboldened. Daniels looked panicked now. This wasn't a situation he'd trained for. Drunk miners he could handle. Domestic disputes, claim jumpers, the occasional drifter causing trouble, all within his skill set. But a peaceful protest? People using words instead of fists? That required different tools than a badge and a gun. I'm going to get Mr. Crowley, Daniels said, backing toward the office door. Yipu, you people stay put. Don't do anything stupid. He disappeared inside. The crowd remained, patient as stone. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or recognition. These people didn't know him, had no reason to trust him, but they were standing anyway. Not because they believed in him, but because they believed in something bigger. The idea that things could be different, that power could be challenged, that silence wasn't the only option. It wouldn't last. Elias knew that. Hope was fragile. Fear was patient. William Crowley would find ways to break this, to isolate the leaders, to make examples. But for right now, in this moment, something real was happening. The outer door opened again. William Crowley stepped out, Wade close behind him. Father and son, united in purpose, if not method. William surveyed the crowd with the calm assessment of a general reviewing troops. This is disappointing, William said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've built this town, provided jobs, paid wages, kept the economy moving, and this is how you repay me? Standing outside my jail, questioning my authority? It's not your jail, Miss Carter said. It belongs to the territory, and the territory belongs to all of us. Spoken like someone who's never had to make hard decisions, never had to balance books or meet payroll or keep a business alive when copper prices drop and workers strike. William descended the steps, moving into the crowd. They parted for him. Habit, instinct, ingrained deference. You think I'm your enemy? I'm the only thing standing between you and starvation. Without my mine, this town dies. Without my lumberyard, you've got no materials. Without my investments, there's no future here. Without fair wages and honest dealings, there's no future anyway, Tom Briggs shot back. We can't eat promises, Mr. Crowley. Can't feed our families on your speeches about economy. Then leave. William spread his arms. Nobody's forcing you to stay. You don't like how I run things? Pack up, move on, try your luck somewhere else. See if you find better. The challenge hung in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Leaving meant giving up homes, abandoning gardens planted and relationships built, meant admitting defeat, meant starting over with nothing in a world that gave second chances grudgingly, if at all. That's what I thought, William said into the silence. You complain, but you stay. Because deep down, you know this is as good as it gets. The world isn't fair, never has been. Men like me create order from chaos. Men like Boone, he gestured toward the jail, they just create chaos and call it justice. My father's right. Wade stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. He looked haggard, bruised ego showing through the swagger. You're all being manipulated. Boone's a stranger, a drifter. He's got no stake in this town, no investment in your futures. He's using you to settle some personal grudge. and when the dust clears, he'll ride away and leave you to deal with the consequences." "What consequences?" Miss Carter demanded. "The consequence of knowing the truth? Of seeing evidence that Marcus Crowley cheated people? Of understanding the system's been rigged against us. The consequence," Wade said, voice hardening, "of choosing sides against your neighbors, against the people who've taken care of you. My father gave your father a job when nobody else would, Miss Carter. Gave him credit when the bank refused. And this is how you show gratitude?" The personal attack landed. Miss Carter flinched, color rising in her cheeks. The crowd murmured, some sympathetic, others uncertain. William was good at this, Elias realized. Good at making resistance feel like betrayal. Good at twisting loyalty into chains. "My father worked himself to death in your mine," Miss Carter said, voice shaking but steady. "Died when a support beam broke because you cut corners on maintenance. You gave his widow $50 and told her to be grateful. So no, Mr. Crowley, I don't feel like I owe you gratitude. I feel like I'm owed answers." The crowd's energy shifted again. Sympathetic murmurs. A few people moved closer to Miss Carter, forming a loose protective circle. William's expression darkened. "You're making accusations you can't prove." "Then prove me wrong. Open your books. Let an independent inspector examine the mine. Show us the maintenance records, the safety reports, the injury logs. If everything's legitimate, you've got nothing to hide." "I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm not on trial here." "Maybe you should be." The words came from the jail window. Elias pressed his face against the bars, making himself visible. "Open your books, William. If Marcus was the only problem, if his crimes were isolated, then transparency helps you. Shows the town your hands are clean. But if you refuse, if you hide behind authority and threats, then you're admitting there's more to find." William's face went purple. "You shut your mouth, Boone. You're a prisoner. You've got no rights here. I've got the same rights as everyone. To speak, to question, to demand accountability. You can lock me up, but you can't lock up the truth. Can't I?" William turned to Daniels. "Sheriff, I want that window boarded up, and I want this crowd dispersed. Use force if necessary." Daniels paled. "Sir, if I use force on unarmed citizens, then they shouldn't be unarmed citizens interfering with the law. Do your job or I'll find someone who will." The threat was clear: comply or be replaced. Daniels stood frozen, caught between duty and self-preservation. Before he could respond, hoofbeats echoed from the north road. Fast, urgent, a single rider pushing his mount hard. The crowd turned, watching as the horseman thundered into town. Young guy, barely 20, covered in trail dust. He reined up hard in front of the jail, horse lathered and heaving. "Mr. Crowley, sir!" William's attention snapped to him. "What is it, Jackson?" "It's the Silver Creek Road. There's been an accident. A wagon overturned at Devil's Bend. Multiple people hurt." The crowd went silent. Miss Carter's hand flew to her mouth. Tom Briggs cursed under his breath. Elias felt ice in his stomach. Devil's Bend was 10 miles out, a treacherous curve where the road skirted a steep drop. Wagons tipped there occasionally when drivers took it too fast or lost control. But the timing was too convenient, too perfect. "Who was in the wagon?" Miss Carter asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jackson looked uncomfortable. "Not sure, ma'am. I just saw the wreckage and rode back fast as I could, but someone said it might have been the group heading to Silver Creek." The crowd exploded into motion, people shouting, running for horses, organizing search parties. Miss Carter grabbed Tom Briggs' arm, saying something urgent. Others clustered around Jackson, demanding details. In the chaos, William Crowley caught Elias's eye. Just for a second, just long enough for a message to pass between them. "This is what happens when you push." Elias gripped the window bars hard enough to feel them dig into his palms. Caleb, the Reverend, the 5 others who'd gone with them. If that accident wasn't an accident, if William had arranged it, then Elias had just gotten 7 people killed. "I need to get out there," Elias called to Daniels. "Let me help with the rescue." "You're not going anywhere." But Daniels looked uncertain, overwhelmed by the sudden crisis. "People could be dying right now. Every minute counts. You want more blood on your hands?" William stepped close to the jail wall, voice low enough that only Elias could hear. "You wanted a war, Boone. Congratulations, you've got one. And in war, there are casualties. Question is, how many more are you willing to sacrifice for your principles? If you hurt them, I didn't hurt anyone. The road's dangerous. Accidents happen. Just like they happened to those 12 people Marcus wrote about in his ledger. Just like they could happen to anyone who doesn't understand how things work in Copperwood. He walked away before Elias could respond, calling out to the crowd. Everyone capable of riding, mount up. We'll form search parties, check the accident site, bring back survivors. Daniels, you coordinate from here. Wade, you're with me. The organization happened fast. Within minutes, 20 riders were assembled. William at the lead, Wade beside him, armed men from the lumberyard forming a protective cordon. They thundered out of town, dust rising in their wake. Those left behind milled around the jail, anxious and angry and scared. Miss Carter stood apart from the group, arms wrapped around herself, staring north like she could see through 10 miles of desert to whatever waited at Devil's Bend. Elias pressed his forehead against the bars. The metal was sun-hot, almost burning, but he welcomed the pain, used it to focus, to think. If Caleb was dead, the ledgers died with him. William would claim they were forgeries, products of Elias's imagination. Without witnesses to corroborate, the case fell apart. The town would return to normal, normal being quiet subjugation, fear-based compliance, the slow grinding poverty that killed as surely as any bullet. But if Caleb survived, if even one of them survived, then hope survived too. The hours that followed were the longest of Elias's life. He paced the cell like a caged animal, mind running through scenarios. Best case, everyone was fine, the accident was real, William was just opportunistic. Worst case, everyone was dead, thrown from the wagon, or finished off after the crash. Middle cases, some survived, some didn't, and William would use the chaos to control the narrative. No way to know until they came back. The sun crawled toward the western horizon. The crowd outside the jail thinned as people returned to their lives, children to feed, animals to tend, the daily demands that didn't stop for tragedy. Miss Carter remained sitting on the steps of the general store across the street, watching the north road. Elias caught her attention through the window. Miss Carter. She looked up, hesitated, then crossed the street. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought. 23, maybe 24. Dark hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. "Are you all right?" Elias asked. "No," she laughed bitterly. "But I don't suppose anyone is right now." "You knew my father. What was his name?" "Robert Carter. He worked the deep shaft for 6 years. Was planning to quit, save enough to move us to California, start over. Then the accident happened, and..." She trailed off. "Your father would have liked him." "I never knew my father. He died before I could remember him." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, connected by loss and circumstance. "Why did you speak up?" Elias finally asked. "You've got no stake in defending me." "I've got every stake. My father died because William Crowley values profit over safety. My mother worked herself sick trying to make ends meet afterward. I've seen what this town does to people, how it grinds them down until they're too tired to fight back. When you stood up to Wade, when you called out the cheating and the lies, you did what everyone's been too scared to do. So yeah, I'll speak up, even if it costs me. It might cost more than you think." "I know." She met his eyes. "But silence has a cost too, and I'm tired of paying it." Before Elias could respond, the sound of hoofbeats carried from the north. Multiple horses, moving slower than they'd left. The rescue party returning. Miss Carter ran to the edge of town. Elias pressed against the bars, trying to see. The riders emerged from the desert heat shimmer like ghosts solidifying. William at the front, expression grim. Wade beside him. Behind them, 4 horses carrying bodies draped in blankets. 4. Elias counted them twice, hoping he'd miscounted. But no, 4 bodies. The group that left had been 7 people. The riders stopped in the town center. People emerged from buildings drawn by the somber procession. William dismounted, removed his hat. "I'm sorry," he said, voice heavy with manufactured grief. The wagon went off the road at Devil's Bend. It appears the wheel axle broke, couldn't handle the weight and the terrain. The fall was significant. We found 4 dead at the scene. "Who?" someone called out. "Who was killed?" "Tom Briggs, Sarah Fleming, Dutch Howard." William paused. And Reverend Aldridge. Miss Carter made a sound like she'd been punched. Around her, people began crying. Tom Briggs had been popular, honest, hardworking, a friend to everyone. Sarah Fleming was a widow with 3 children. Dutch Howard had run the bar at the Rose for 15 years, and Reverend Aldridge had been the town's moral center, the one person even the Crowleys couldn't fully intimidate. "What about the others?" Miss Carter asked. "Caleb McBride? Jenny Williams? Marcus? Michael Chen?" Williams' expression shifted, just slightly, but Elias caught it. Annoyance, frustration. "We didn't find them at the accident site. There were tracks suggesting they left on foot before we arrived. Could be they went for help. Could be they're injured somewhere off the road. We're organizing another search party at first light." Lies. Every word was lies. Elias could hear it in the careful phrasing, the strategic ambiguity. William had found them, or found where they'd hidden, and decided leaving them missing served his purposes better than bringing them back dead. "I'm going back out there now," Miss Carter said. "Tonight. They could be hurt. They could need—" "It's too dangerous," William cut her off. "Devil's Bend at night is suicide. The road's barely visible in daylight. We'll go at dawn with proper equipment. But if they're injured, then 12 more hours won't make a difference." William's voice hardened. "I understand your concern, Miss Carter, but I won't risk more lives on a night rescue that's likely to create more casualties." It was reasonable, logical, everything a concerned leader should say, but Elias heard the subtext. "I need time to find them. Time to make sure they don't reach Silver Creek. Time to control this." "This is your fault," someone shouted. A miner Elias didn't recognize. "That stranger got people killed with his lies and accusations." "Now hold on," Miss Carter started. "No, Tom's dead because he believed that outsider, believed there was something wrong with how things work here, and look what it got him." The crowd's mood was turning. Grief needed a target, and Elias was convenient. Locked up, unable to defend himself, already branded as troublemaker. "4 good people are dead," another voice added. "And for what? Some ledgers that probably don't prove anything? Some old man's vendetta against the Crowleys?" William didn't add fuel to the fire. Didn't need to. Just stood there looking sad and disappointed, letting the town's anger find its natural target. "You should hang him," someone shouted. "Skip the trial. He's already wanted in other territories. Just string him up and be done with it." "No." William raised his hands. "We're not a lynch mob. We're civilized people. Boone will stand trial, answer for his crimes, and face justice legally. That's how we do things in Copperwood." The performance was masterful. William positioning himself as the voice of reason, the defender of law and order, while simultaneously letting the mob's energy build against Elias. If violence happened, if someone broke into the jail, if an accident occurred in the cell, William could claim he'd tried to prevent it, could wash his hands of the blood. Elias watched it unfold with cold detachment. He'd seen this pattern before. The manipulation of public sentiment, the weaponization of grief, the way fear and anger could be directed like water through channels, controlled and utilized by anyone smart enough to understand the currents. The crowd dispersed slowly, carrying the bodies to the undertakers. Families would need to be notified, funeral arrangements made. The machinery of mourning would grind on, and in the grinding, the momentum of resistance would be crushed. Night fell. The cell went dark except for moonlight through the window. Somewhere outside, a dog howled. Somewhere further, a child cried. The sounds of a town processing trauma, each person alone with their grief. Elias sat in the darkness and planned. The jail's construction was solid, but not perfect. Stone walls, yes, but old mortar that had shifted with time and temperature. The window bars were iron, set deep, probably immovable. But the door was wood reinforced with metal straps. The lock was decent, but not exceptional. Given time and tools, he could work it. He had no tools. He had time, but not much. William would move soon, either stage an escape attempt that ended with Elias shot, or arrange a trial so rigged that the verdict was predetermined. Either way, the clock was running. Footsteps outside. Quiet, hesitant. Someone trying not to be heard. Elias moved to the window. Miss Carter stood in the shadows across the street, partially hidden by the water trough. She caught his movement, stepped closer. "I'm going out there," she whispered. "Tonight." I don't care what William says. You'll get yourself killed. Maybe. But I can't just sit here knowing they might be alive. If they're alive, William's men are already hunting them. You won't make it to Devil's Bend before running into patrols. Then what am I supposed to do? Nothing? Just accept that 4 people are dead and 3 more are missing and it's all just bad luck? Elias gripped the bars. You're supposed to be smart, strategic. Rushing out there gets you killed and helps nobody. But there are other ways to fight. Like what? Like finding allies. Like getting word to the territorial marshal. Send someone who won't be recognized, someone William doesn't have eyes on. Like documenting everything that's happened, creating a record that survives even if we don't. We don't have the ledgers anymore. Caleb had them. But we have witnesses. We have people who saw Marcus cheat, who know the system's rigged. Get their statements in writing. Hide copies in multiple places. Make it impossible for William to bury the truth, even if he buries us. Miss Carter was quiet for a long moment. You're talking like we're already dead. I'm talking like we might be. And I'd rather die having accomplished something than die hoping for rescue that never comes. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll start tonight. Talk to people, get statements, but I need something from you. What? Hope. Tell me this isn't futile. Tell me there's a point to fighting when the other side has all the power. Elias thought about all the fights he'd lost, all the towns where he'd tried and failed to make a difference, all the graves he'd visited before moving on to the next impossible battle. I can't tell you that, he said honestly. I don't know if it's futile or not. Don't know if fighting matters in the long run, but I know that not fighting definitely doesn't matter. At least if we go down swinging, we went down as ourselves. That counts for something. Does it? Ask me when we're dead. If we can still talk then, I'll give you a better answer. She laughed, soft, bitter, but real. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the craziest. Probably both. Miss Carter disappeared into the shadows. Elias listened to her footsteps fade, then returned to his bench. Sleep wouldn't come. Too much adrenaline, too much worry. But he lay down anyway, conserving energy. Somewhere out in the desert, Caleb McBride was either hiding or dead. The ledgers were either safe or destroyed. The truth was either spreading or dying with the people who'd carried it, and Elias was locked in a cell, powerless to affect any of it. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the 4 bodies wrapped in blankets, tried not to imagine their last moments, the sickening lurch as the wagon tipped, the fall, the impact. Tried not to calculate how much of their blood was on his hands, failed on all counts. The night stretched on, infinite and merciless, and Elias Boone waited in the darkness for whatever came next. Dawn broke like a promise nobody intended to keep. Gray light filtered through the cell window, painting everything in shades of ash and regret. Elias hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, just spent the night listening to the sounds of a town trying to convince itself that tragedy was just bad luck and not the inevitable result of choosing silence over truth. The outer door banged open, heavy footsteps. Sheriff Daniels appeared in the corridor, holding a tin plate with something that might have been food in a previous life. He slid it under the cell door without meeting Elias's eyes. Eat. Elias looked at the plate. Gray porridge, congealed and cold. A piece of bread hard enough to crack teeth. He wasn't hungry anyway. What's happening out there? Elias asked. None of your concern. 4 people are dead because of decisions made in this town. I'd say that's everyone's concern. Daniels finally looked at him, and Elias saw something unexpected in the sheriff's eyes. Not anger or contempt, but exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a man who'd compromised himself so many times he couldn't remember what integrity felt like. You want to know what's happening? Daniels said quietly. William's organizing a search party for the missing folks. Real one this time, with volunteers who actually want to find them. But he's also got his own men out there, Wade and about 8 others. And I got a feeling they're not looking to rescue anybody. Then stop them. With what authority? William owns this town. Owns me. I put on this badge thinking I'd keep people safe, maintain order. Turns out order just means doing what I'm told and looking the other way when convenient. So take it off. Daniels touched the badge on his chest. And then what? I got a wife, Boone. Got 2 kids. They eat because I wear this. They got a roof because I don't ask too many questions. You think I like what I've become? You think I sleep good at night? But I sleep, and my family survives. That's the trade. There's always a trade, Elias said. Question is whether you can live with the terms. Can you? Daniels shot back. You're sitting in that cell because you couldn't let things be. Couldn't ride through town without stirring up trouble. Now 4 people are dead and 3 more are probably dying in the desert. Was it worth it? Your principles, your crusade. Was it worth their lives? The question hit harder than any of Wade's punches, because Elias had been asking himself the same thing all night, and he still didn't have an answer. I don't know, Elias admitted, but I know what happens when nobody stands up. Know what happens when good people make trades like yours, one compromise at a time, until there's nothing left of who they used to be. Maybe I got those 4 killed. Or maybe the system that made standing up so dangerous is what killed them. Either way, we're here now. Question is what you do next. Daniels was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the door between the cell block and the office slightly ajar. An accident, or maybe something else. Elias waited 5 minutes, listening. Daniels was in the front office, shuffling papers, doing busy work. But the inner door was open, a compromise the sheriff could live with, a middle ground between duty and conscience. The cell door was still locked. But now Elias could see into the office, could see Daniels' desk, could see the ring of keys hanging on a peg by the door. He filed that information away and forced himself to eat the cold porridge. Tasted like paste mixed with regret, but he needed the calories, needed to be ready for whatever came next. Outside, voices drifted through the window, the search party assembling. Elias recognized Miss Carter's voice among them, insistent, demanding to be included. William's smooth baritone responding, all false concern and strategic delay. It's too dangerous for a young woman, William was saying. The terrain is rough, and if there's trouble, I can ride better than half these men, Miss Carter interrupted. And I knew the Reverend longer than any of you. If he's alive out there, he'd want to see a familiar face. Nevertheless, I'm going, with or without your permission. A pause. Elias could picture William's face, calculating, weighing the optics of refusing versus the risk of letting her go. Fine, William finally said, but you stay with the main group. No wandering off alone. And if we say it's time to turn back, we turn back. Understood? Understood. The search party rode out, 20 people this time, maybe more. Elias listened to the hoofbeats fade, then returned to studying the office through the open door. Daniels was reading a newspaper, or pretending to. His hand kept drifting to his gun, then away, like he was fighting some internal argument. Hours crawled past. The sun climbed, turning the cell back into an oven. Sweat soaked through Elias's shirt. His ribs ached from Wade's earlier beating. His throat was sandpaper dry, but the water bucket Daniels had left was empty. Around midday, the outer door opened again. Wade Crowley stepped in, alone. He'd changed clothes since the rescue attempt. Clean shirt, fresh vest, gun belt polished. Trying to look respectable. Failing. Sheriff, Wade said, take a break. Get some food. I'll watch the prisoner. Daniels stood, hesitated. Your father said, my father's out in the desert. I'm here, and I'm telling you to take a break. Or do I need to make it an order? The threat was subtle but clear. Daniels grabbed his hat and left without another word. The outer door closed. Wade and Elias were alone. Wade walked to the cell, stood studying Elias like he was examining a bug under glass. His hand rested on his gun, not quite drawing but ready. Always ready. You cost me everything, Wade said quietly. My reputation, my authority. People used to respect me, fear me. Now they whisper behind my back, laugh. Call me the man who got beat by some old drifter. You cost yourself that, Elias replied, the moment you pulled a gun on an unarmed man. I should have killed you, should have shot you in that saloon and claimed self-defense. Would have been my word against a dead man's. But you didn't. And now you have to live with that choice. Wade's face flushed. His hand tightened on the gun grip. I could still do it, right now. Walk in there, put a bullet in you, say you tried to escape. Who's going to contradict me? Daniels? He does what he's told. My father? He'd thank me for solving the problem. Maybe. Or maybe shooting a caged man proves everything I said about you. Proves you're not tough, just vicious. Proves the only way you can win is when the other person can't fight back. Shut up. Truth hurts, doesn't it? Knowing that without your father's money and influence, without your gun and your gang, you're just another bully who can't back up his threats. Wade drew the pistol, cocked the hammer. His hand shook. Not from fear, but from rage barely contained. I said shut up. Elias stood, moved to the bars, made himself an easier target. Do it then. Prove me right. Prove you're exactly what everyone's starting to realize you are. A coward with a gun. For a long moment, Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. Elias could see the calculation in his eyes, measuring consequences, weighing satisfaction against risk. The gun barrel wavered. Then Wade lowered it, uncocked the hammer. You're not worth it. Keep telling yourself that. Wade's face twisted. He slammed the gun back into its holster and stormed out, leaving the outer door open in his anger. Elias exhaled slowly. His heart was hammering, adrenaline flooding his system. That had been closer than he'd let on. Wade was unstable, humiliated, dangerous, the kind of dangerous that made unpredictable decisions. But he'd backed down again. And each time he backed down, each time he chose not to pull the trigger, he weakened his own mythology. Fear was only effective if people believed you'd follow through. Elias moved to the open door between the cell block and office. Daniels was gone. Wade was gone. The front door stood ajar, letting in dust and sunlight. The keys hung on their peg, 10 feet away. This was the moment, the opportunity Daniels had maybe accidentally created. Elias could pick the cell lock given time, but he didn't have tools. The window bars were immovable. But if he could somehow reach those keys, he looked around the cell. The wooden bench could be broken, maybe. Use a piece of wood to reach through the office door, hook the keys. But the angle was wrong. The door opening didn't line up with the key peg. He'd need to get the office door open wider, which meant reaching it somehow. The tin plate from breakfast sat by the cell door. Elias picked it up, tested its weight. Light, but rigid enough. He bent it slightly, creating a curve, then slid it under the cell door into the corridor. Using his boot, he pushed it toward the office door, slowly, carefully. It took 5 minutes of patient work, but finally, the plate was positioned against the office door. Elias used the edge of his boot to apply pressure, pushing the door open another foot. Now he could see the key ring clearly. He took off his boot, removed the lace, tied a small loop at one end, then he fed the lace under the cell door, into the corridor toward the office. The leather was stiff, didn't want to cooperate. He had to use his fingers through the bars to guide it, inch by inch. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His fingers cramped. The angle was brutal, requiring him to press his face against the bars hard enough to leave marks. The bootlace reached the threshold between corridor and office. Elias took a breath, then flicked his wrist, sending a wave through the leather. The loop sailed through the air, arced toward the key peg, and missed by 6 inches. He pulled it back. Tried again. Missed. Again. Missed. On the 8th try, the loop caught on the lower peg, not the one with the keys, but the one below it where Daniels hung his coat. Close enough. Elias wrapped the bootlace around his fingers and pulled gently, testing the hold. It slipped off. He started over, this time aiming for a different angle, trying to actually loop the peg rather than just catch it. 3 more tries. 4. On the 5th, the lace wrapped around the coat peg and held. Elias pulled slowly, felt resistance. The peg started to tilt toward him. Then footsteps outside. Elias yanked the bootlace back fast, coiling it in his hand. The peg snapped back to vertical. He'd just gotten his boot back on when Daniels walked through the front door, carrying a sandwich wrapped in paper. The sheriff paused, looking at the open office door. His eyes flicked to Elias, then to the door, then back. Reading the scene, understanding what had almost happened. He closed the office door firmly, locked it, hung the key ring on a different peg, higher, further from the door. Then he sat at his desk and unwrapped his sandwich without saying a word. The moment was gone. Elias sat back on the bench, breathing hard. So close. So damn close. The afternoon dragged on. The search party hadn't returned. That could mean they'd found something. Or it could mean William was taking his time, making sure the missing 3 stayed missing. Around 4 o'clock, a commotion outside drew Daniels to the window. Elias strained to hear. Voices raised. Someone crying. Bad news arriving on horseback. Daniels opened the door, stepped out. Elias pressed against the cell window, angling for a view. A rider had returned, one of William's men, face grim. He was talking to a small crowd that had gathered. Elias caught fragments. Found signs of them. Tracks heading west. But also blood. Lot of blood. Miss Carter's voice, sharp and demanding. How much blood? Like from an injury or... Can't say for sure, ma'am, but enough that someone's hurt bad, maybe dying. Then we need to go now. Organize another... Mr. Crowley says it's too dangerous. Says the tracks lead into rattlesnake country, and going in there at dusk is suicide. He's calling off the search till morning. That's murder. If someone's bleeding out there, Mr. Crowley's decision is final. Elias closed his eyes. William was running out the clock, letting exposure and dehydration and blood loss do his work for him. By morning, anyone still alive would be too weak to matter. And if the bodies were eventually found, well, tragic accident. Unfortunate consequences of fleeing a wagon crash in a panic. The crowd dispersed, arguing among themselves. Some sided with William's caution. Others thought the search should continue. Most were just tired. Tired of death, tired of conflict, tired of feeling helpless against forces they couldn't control. Miss Carter appeared at the jail window after dark. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her dress torn from riding through brush. I tried to go alone, she whispered, waited till the main party turned back, then headed west. Made it maybe 2 miles before Wade's men stopped me, surrounded me, told me to go home, or they'd escort me back tied to my saddle. You shouldn't have risked it. What else was I supposed to do? Just let them die? Yes. Elias hated saying it, but it was true. Because getting yourself killed doesn't save them. It just adds one more body to the count. I can't accept that. Can't accept that we just give up. I'm not saying give up. I'm saying be smart. William wants you to do something reckless. Wants you to give him an excuse to silence you permanently. Don't give him that. Miss Carter leaned against the building, shoulders shaking. The Reverend was a good man. He baptized me when I was 8, married my parents, buried my father, and now he's dying in the desert because he believed things could be better. Or he's already dead, and torturing yourself with hope is just another kind of suffering. How can you be so cold? Practice. Elias gripped the bars. I've lost people before. Lots of people. And I learned that grief doesn't honor them. Action does. You want to make the Reverend's death mean something? Then survive. Gather those witness statements like we talked about. Build a case so solid that even William can't bury it. That's how you fight back. She wiped her eyes, nodded. I talked to 6 people today. Got written statements from 3. They're scared, but they're angrier than they are scared. At least for now. Good. Hide those statements, multiple copies in multiple places, and find someone who can ride to the territorial marshal's office. Someone William doesn't know, doesn't have leverage over. I might have someone. A cousin in Silver Creek. She's got no ties to Copperwood, no reason for William to watch her. Then get word to her. Tell her everything. Tell her if she doesn't hear from you within a week, she should assume the worst and take the statements to the marshal herself. Miss Carter straightened, some of the defeat leaving her posture. Okay, I can do that. One more thing. When this goes bad, and it will go bad, you need to be ready to run. Have a horse saddled, have supplies packed. Don't wait for permission or closure. Just go. What about you? I'll manage. I always do. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to memorize his face. Then she disappeared into the darkness. Elias returned to the bench. His body was screaming. Thirst, hunger, exhaustion, all demanding attention he couldn't give. He'd been in worse situations. Probably. Maybe. Hard to remember through the haze of discomfort. Sleep took him eventually, dragging him down into dreams of desert roads and overturned wagons, of 4 bodies wrapped in blankets and 3 shadows running west toward a horizon that kept receding no matter how fast they moved. He woke to gunfire. 3 shots, rapid succession, from somewhere north of town. Then shouting, running footsteps. Elias was at the window instantly. Dawn was just breaking, the sky that pale gray that comes before true sunrise. People were emerging from buildings drawn by the noise. Another shot, closer this time. Then Wade Crowley appeared, riding hard down the main street. His horse was lathered, eyes rolling. Wade's shirt was torn, a bloody scratch across his cheek. He reined up outside his father's house, the largest building in town, and vaulted from the saddle. "They're alive," Wade was shouting. "The bastards are alive and they're armed." William Crowley emerged onto his porch, half-dressed, confusion giving way to anger. "What happened? Where's the rest of your men?" "Dead. All of them." Wade's voice cracked with hysteria. "We found their camp at dawn. Thought we had them cornered, but they were ready. Had guns, had cover. McBride shot Tommy in the throat. That Chinese guy took out Reeves. The woman, Jenny Williams, she killed Carson with a headshot at 100 yards. Elias felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Hope. Actual hope. Caleb was alive, and he was fighting back. William grabbed Wade's shoulders. "Where are they now?" "Coming here. Maybe an hour behind me. They took our horses, took our weapons, and they've got the ledgers. They're bringing everything to Copperwood." The town had gathered now, everyone listening. The implications spread through the crowd like ripples in water. The missing three weren't victims. They were survivors. And they were coming with evidence and witnesses and probably a hell of a lot of anger. William's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, fear, calculation, and finally cold determination. "Everyone inside. Now. Sheriff, get your deputies armed. Wade, round up every man who knows how to shoot. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. McBride and his friends when they arrive." "You mean you're going to kill them?" someone called out. Elias couldn't see who. "I mean, I'm going to protect this town from armed agitators who killed 8 of our men." "Your men," Miss Carter's voice cut through the crowd. "Not our men. Your private enforcers who tried to murder witnesses." William spun toward her. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so does everyone else here. You staged that wagon accident. You tried to silence everyone who could testify against Marcus. And when that didn't work, you sent your son to finish the job. Well, guess what? It failed. They're alive, and they're bringing the truth whether you like it or not." "The truth?" William descended the porch steps, moving toward Miss Carter with predatory focus. "The truth is that 3 criminals attacked a legal search party, killed 8 men in cold blood, and when they get here, they'll be arrested for murder." "By who?" Miss Carter stood her ground. "By Sheriff Daniels, who does whatever you tell him. By a court you control. This isn't law, Mr. Crowley. It's tyranny." The crowd murmured, some agreeing, some uncertain, all watching to see what happened next. William stopped 2 feet from Miss Carter. Up close, the size difference was striking. He was twice her weight, half a foot taller, radiating physical menace. "You're skating on very thin ice, young lady. I've been patient with your accusations because of your father's service, but my patience has limits." "So does my fear." They stood locked in silent confrontation. Elias could see Daniels hovering at the edge of the crowd, hand on his gun, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Wade had dismounted and was organizing men, about 15 of them, all armed, all loyal to the Crowley payroll. This was the moment where everything would break one way or the other. Either the town would stand with Miss Carter, or they'd retreat into the safety of complicity. One person stepped forward, then another, then 5 more, a dozen, 20, until half the crowd had formed a loose line between William and Miss Carter. "That's enough, William," Tom Briggs's brother said. His name was Samuel, Elias remembered now. "My brother died because of this. And maybe you didn't push that wagon yourself, but you created the situation that killed him. So no, you're not arresting anyone else, not killing anyone else, not until we hear what McBride has to say." William looked around, seeing his control evaporate in real time. The fear that had kept people in line was failing, replaced by something stronger: grief, anger, the simple human need to believe that justice was possible. "This is mutiny," William said quietly. "This is a reckoning," Samuel Briggs replied. William's face hardened. He turned to Wade. "When McBride arrives, you and the men take positions on the rooftops. Anyone who interferes, you put them down. Understood?" Wade hesitated, just for a second, but long enough for everyone to see. "Father, if we start shooting townspeople, They stopped being townspeople when they sided with criminals. Now they're insurgents, and we handle insurgents the way we've always handled them. The threat was explicit now. No more pretense of law or civilization, just raw power, willing to do whatever it took to maintain control. Elias rattled the cell bars, drawing attention. You do that, William, and you guarantee your own destruction. Kill these people and it becomes national news. Territory sends marshals, maybe even federal troops. You think you can fight that? I can fight anything that threatens what I've built. Even if it means burning the whole town down? William met his eyes. Especially then. Better to rule ashes than serve in someone else's kingdom. He walked back into his house. Wade followed, along with the armed men. They were going to fortify positions, set up firing lanes, prepare for a siege. The crowd stood in stunned silence. They'd pushed back, shown unity, and in response, William had shown them exactly what he was willing to do. Miss Carter approached the jail window, voice urgent. We need to get you out. You're the only one who might be able to stop this before it turns into a massacre. How? Daniels isn't going to unlock the door and I can't reach the keys. Then we break the door. With what? That's solid oak reinforced with iron. You'd need an axe and 10 minutes nobody has. Then we... She stopped, thinking. The window. The bars are set in mortar, right? Set deep. You'd need tools to extract them. But the frame around them, the window frame itself, that's just wood. She looked up at the jail's construction. If we can get enough people pulling at the right angle. It was crazy. Probably wouldn't work. But probably was better than definitely dying when William's men started shooting. Get Samuel Briggs, Elias said. Get anyone strong enough to pull. And get rope. Good rope. Not frayed. We've got maybe 30 minutes before McBride arrives. Less before William's men are in position. Miss Carter ran. Elias examined the window more carefully. The bars were immovable, yes, but they were set into a wooden frame that was itself set into the stone wall. If enough force was applied from the outside, the whole frame might tear free. Might. 5 minutes later, Miss Carter returned with Samuel Briggs and 7 other men. They had rope, a sledgehammer, and the desperate determination of people who'd run out of other options. We're going to make a lot of noise, Samuel said. William's men will hear. Then we need to work fast. Elias fed rope through the window bars. The men outside tied it off around the frame, creating multiple attachment points. On 3, everyone pulls straight back. Don't jerk. Steady pressure. Let the wood fatigue. They pulled. The frame groaned, shifted slightly. Somewhere nearby, a shout went up. They'd been spotted. But the men kept pulling, muscles straining. The frame cracked. Not free yet, but cracking. Again, Elias called. They reset, pulled harder. The crack widened. One corner of the frame tore free from the mortar, leaving a gap. A gunshot cracked from a nearby rooftop. The bullet hit the jail wall a foot from Samuel's head. Everyone scattered except Samuel, who grabbed the sledgehammer and swung it at the weakened frame. 2 hits. 3. The frame splintered, bars and all canting at a sharp angle. Another gunshot, this one closer. The shooter was finding their range. Samuel swung one more time. The frame tore completely free, crashing to the ground outside. The window opening was now large enough for a man to crawl through. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled himself up, squeezed through the gap. The rough stone scraped his ribs, tore his already damaged shirt. He dropped to the ground outside just as another bullet sparked off the jail wall. This way. Miss Carter was already running toward the livery stable. Elias followed, Samuel and the others providing cover. They made it inside as bullets chewed splinters from the stable's wooden walls. Elias found his horse, the gray mare he'd ridden into Copperwood a lifetime ago. His saddlebags were there too, and more importantly, his Winchester. He checked the rifle's action, verified it was loaded. Muscle memory from decades of practice making the movements automatic. What now? Miss Carter asked, breathless. Now we stop a war. Elias looked out at the street. William's men were taking positions on rooftops, in windows, behind water troughs. The townspeople who'd helped with the escape were scrambling for cover. In maybe 15 minutes, Caleb McBride would ride into a killing field. How do you plan to do that? By giving William something he wants more than revenge. Elias swung into the saddle. Me. Before Miss Carter could protest, he spurred the mare forward, out of the stable and into the open street. Bullets immediately started flying, from the rooftops, from the windows. But Elias didn't ride toward cover. He rode straight down the middle of Main Street toward William Crowley's house. The shooting stopped, probably because William wanted him alive, wanted the satisfaction of a public execution. Elias reined up in front of the house. William stood on the porch, Wade beside him, both armed. "I'm surrendering," Elias called out. "On one condition, you let McBride and the others into town. Let them speak. Let them present their evidence. And after everyone's heard what they have to say, I'll submit to whatever judgment you want. Trial, hanging, doesn't matter. But the townspeople get to hear the truth first." William studied him. "Why would I agree to that?" "Because if shooting starts, you lose. Even if you kill McBride, even if you kill me, you'll have to kill half the town to maintain control. And that's a war you can't win. But if you let this play out in public, if you trust your version of events to stand up against theirs, then you might walk away from this still respected, still in power." It was a lie. William had to know it was a lie. But it was a lie wrapped in logic, offering a path that didn't end with his empire burning. "And if I refuse?" Elias raised the Winchester, not quite aiming at William, but close enough. "Then we find out how many of your men are willing to die for your pride." "My guess? Not many." Fear's a powerful motivator, but it breaks down when bullets start flying. Men discover real quick what they're actually willing to die for. The standoff held. William and Elias locked in silent calculation. Wade's hand twitched toward his gun, but his father stopped him with a gesture. "Fine," William finally said. "They can speak. But if McBride's evidence is fabricated, if this whole thing is exposed as a fraud, then you hang. Today, in the town square where everyone can see. Fair enough?" It wasn't fair at all. William would spin the evidence, would control the narrative, would find ways to discredit anything Caleb presented. But it bought time, and time was the only currency Elias had left to spend. Hoofbeats from the north road. 3 riders appeared through the morning haze, moving slowly, cautiously. They'd seen the armed men, knew they were riding into danger. Caleb McBride led the group. He looked half dead, shirt stained with blood, face gaunt from dehydration, but sitting straight in the saddle and carrying a rifle across his lap. Behind him rode Jenny Williams, a seamstress Elias vaguely recognized, also armed. And the third rider was Michael Chen, a young man who worked at the general store, sporting a bandage around his head, but very much alive. They stopped at the edge of town. Caleb's eyes found Elias, then William, reading the situation. "It's all right," Elias called out. "You can come in. Mr. Crowley has agreed to hear what you have to say." Caleb laughed, bitter and exhausted. "Has he? How generous. And after we speak, what? We get shot trying to leave?" "No violence," William said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd had reformed, people emerging from cover, drawn by the confrontation. "You present your evidence. We examine it publicly. Then the town decides what's true." "The town?" Caleb dismounted, legs shaking from the effort. "When has this town ever decided anything? You decide. You control. That's how it's always been." "Then prove me wrong. Show us this evidence you nearly died protecting. Convince people I'm the monster you claim." Caleb reached into his saddlebag, pulled out the leather-bound ledgers. He also produced a rolled bundle of papers, witness statements, written testimony, documentation of crimes. He'd been busy during those days in the desert. "You want to see?" Caleb held up the ledgers. "Want to read your son's handwriting admitting to fraud? Want to see the loan records with illegal interest rates? Want to read the names of 12 people who disappeared after threatening to expose him?" He threw the ledgers onto the ground between himself and William. They landed in the dust, leather covers splayed open, pages visible. "There's your truth. Read it. All of you," Caleb addressed this crowd. "Now. Every crime documented in Marcus Crowley's own hand, every person he cheated, every law he broke. It's all there." Miss Carter darted forward, grabbed the ledgers before William could reach them. She opened the first one, started reading aloud. "Entry dated March 15th, card game at the Rose Saloon. Used mechanic, sleeve holdout, to deal myself 4 aces. Total take, $87 from Peter Morrison." She flipped pages. "April 2nd, loan to Sarah Fleming, $200 at 40% monthly interest. Threatened foreclosure on her home if payment missed. More pages. May 19th. Confrontation with Daniel Torres regarding suspicious cards. Torres threatened to expose operation. Note, handled by Wade. She looked up from the ledger. It goes on for pages. Dozens of games. Dozens of victims. And that last entry, handled by Wade, Daniel Torres was one of the 12 who disappeared. The crowd was silent, listening, processing. The evidence was damning, and hearing it in Marcus's own words made denial almost impossible. William's face had gone pale. Those could be forged, fabricated by McBride and Boone working together. In my brother's handwriting? Wade's voice was barely a whisper. Father, that's Marcus's hand. I've seen it 1,000 times. He wrote this. The admission hung in the air. Wade, the loyal son, the enforcer, couldn't bring himself to deny the obvious truth. William turned on him. Be quiet. You don't know. I do know. Wade's voice grew stronger. I knew what Marcus was doing. Knew he was cheating people, running illegal loans. I helped him sometimes. Handled problems when they got too loud. He looked at his hands like they were covered in something he couldn't wash off. I told myself it was business. Told myself everyone does it. But reading it written down like that, seeing the names. Wade. Daniel Torres had a family. Peter Morrison was saving for his daughter's wedding. Sarah Fleming was trying to keep her house after her husband died. These weren't just marks or problems to handle. They were people. And we destroyed them. William grabbed Wade's shoulder, spun him around. Don't you dare fall apart now. Not when everything we built is at stake. Everything you built, Wade corrected. I just helped maintain it, and I'm done. He unbuckled his gun belt, let it drop to the porch. Then he walked down the steps, through the crowd, and kept walking until he disappeared around a corner. William stood alone on the porch, watching his son abandon him. For a moment, genuine emotion flickered across his face. Loss, betrayal, fear. Then the mask slammed back into place. So my son was a criminal, William said. I didn't know. If I had, I would have stopped him. But his crimes don't invalidate everything else. Don't negate the jobs I've created, the town I've built. You want to punish someone? Fine. Marcus is dead. Punish his memory. But don't tear down everything good because one man made bad choices. One man? Caleb's voice was ragged. Your son didn't operate in a vacuum. He had protection, had infrastructure, had people like Sheriff Daniels looking the other way. You're asking us to believe you knew nothing? You controlled everything else in this town except your own son's criminal enterprise? Nobody's that blind, William. Nobody. Prove I knew. Show me one piece of evidence linking me directly to Marcus's crimes. Caleb flipped through the ledgers, searching. His hands shook, from exhaustion, from anger, from the desperate need to find something concrete. He couldn't find it, because William was careful. Probably always had been. Probably built his whole empire on plausible deniability, on making sure nothing connected directly back to him. I can't, Caleb finally admitted. I can't prove you knew. But I know you did. Everyone knows you did. Knowing and proving are different things, William said with a cold smile. And in a court of law, this isn't a court of law, Miss Carter interrupted. She'd been reading the second ledger, face growing paler with each page. But if you want to talk about legal proceedings, let's discuss how many territorial and federal laws your son violated. How many charges of fraud, extortion, and possibly murder could be filed? And let's discuss how investigating those charges would require examining your business records, your personal finances, your connections to every operation Marcus ran. She closed the ledger. You might not be directly implicated in these specific crimes, but an investigation will uncover everything else. Every corner you cut, every law you bent, every person you pressured. You sure you want that level of scrutiny? William's confidence wavered. He'd built his empire in the shadows, relying on isolation and fear to prevent oversight. But if territorial marshals came, if federal investigators started digging, those shadows would disappear. What do you want? William asked quietly. Justice, Caleb said. Real justice. Not the kind you buy or control. And what does that look like? It looks like restitution. Every person Marcus cheated gets their money back. Every illegal loan gets forgiven. And you step down from every position of authority you hold in this town. No more controlling the sheriff. No more rigged elections. No more treating Copperwood like your personal kingdom. That's everything. You're asking me to give up everything. No, Caleb corrected. I'm asking you to give up power you never legitimately had. You can keep your businesses, keep your property, but you don't get to run people's lives anymore. The crowd was watching William, waiting to see if the empire would finally crack. Elias could see the calculation in William's eyes. He was weighing options, looking for angles, trying to find a way to maintain some control. Then a new voice cut through the tension. I think that's a fair deal. Everyone turned. The speaker was a man in his 50s, wearing a dusty suit and a silver badge. He'd ridden into town during the confrontation, and somehow nobody had noticed. Who the hell are you? William demanded. Territorial Marshal James Hendricks. Got a very interesting telegram yesterday from a woman in Silver Creek. Something about corruption, murder, and a ledger full of confessions. He dismounted, moved toward the ledgers Miss Carter held. Mind if I take a look at those? Miss Carter handed them over. The marshal flipped through pages, expression growing grimmer. Well, he said finally, this is about as comprehensive a documentation of criminal activity as I've ever seen. Fraud, loan sharking, extortion, conspiracy. And these names at the back, silenced, that's going to require some digging. Literally, probably. Where's the cemetery? William opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His face had gone ashen. Now, Marshal Hendricks continued, I'm going to need to take these ledgers as evidence, going to need statements from everyone involved, and I'm going to need to conduct a thorough investigation of the Crowley businesses, finances, and personal holdings, which means, Mr. Crowley, you should probably hire yourself a good lawyer, one from Denver maybe, someone with experience in territorial courts. He looked around at the crowd. As for the rest of you, anyone who wants to file complaints or provide testimony, come find me at the boarding house. I'll be in town for a while. The crowd erupted into conversation. Some people rushed forward to talk to the marshal. Others stood in stunned disbelief. A few were already heading toward William's businesses, the lumber yard, the mine office, probably to quit or to take back control of their own labor. William Crowley stood on his porch, watching his empire dissolve in real time. He'd built something that required fear and control to survive, and both were evaporating. Without them, the whole structure collapsed. He looked at Elias. No words. Just a long, hate-filled stare that said, this is your fault. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the inevitable result of a system built on exploitation and lies. Hard to separate cause from effect when everything was falling apart at once. Elias dismounted, walked over to Caleb. Up close, the younger man looked worse. Blood loss, dehydration, exhaustion written into every line of his face. You did good, Elias said. 4 people died. And 3 lived. And because of that, everyone in this town has a chance at something better. That's worth something. Is it? Caleb swayed on his feet. When I close my eyes, I see Tom Briggs dying. See the Reverend's body broken on those rocks. See Sarah Fleming's face when she realized the wagon was tipping. Was it worth it, Boone? Was any of this worth it? Elias didn't have an answer. Same question Daniels had asked. Same question he'd been asking himself for 15 years. I don't know, he admitted. But we did it anyway, and now we live with the consequences, both the good and the bad. Caleb nodded slowly, then his knees buckled. Elias caught him before he hit the ground, lowered him gently. Jenny Williams rushed over, calling for water, for a doctor. The town mobilized, people helping the survivors, tending to wounds, offering food and shelter. The unity that had fractured under William's rule was reforming, stronger now because it was chosen rather than enforced. Marshal Hendricks approached Elias. You must be Boone. The telegram mentioned you. Probably nothing good. Actually, the woman, Miss Carter's cousin, spoke highly of you, said you stood up when nobody else would. That said, he paused. I've seen some wanted posters with your name on them. Desertion, that deputy in Arizona. You and I are going to need to have a conversation about that. I figured. Not today, though. Today you get a pass because you helped prevent a massacre and brought evidence of serious crimes to light. But tomorrow? We talk. And you might not like how that conversation ends. Fair enough. The marshal moved on to interview other witnesses. Elias stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by chaos and activity and the messy, complicated aftermath of justice. He'd done what he came to do. Stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Exposed corruption. Gave a town a chance to choose its own future. And like always, he had no idea if it would last. If Copperwood would build something better, or if a new William Crowley would emerge, different name but same methods. If the sacrifices would mean something, or if they'd just be footnotes in a history nobody remembered. But for right now, in this moment, people were choosing hope over fear. That had to count for something, even if he couldn't prove it. The doctor's office smelled like carbolic acid and old blood. Elias sat on a wooden chair in the corner, watching Doc Pritchard work on Caleb's injuries. The younger man had passed out twice during the examination, once from pain, once from exhaustion. Now he lay on the table, chest bandaged, breathing shallow but steady. "He'll live," Doc Pritchard said, washing his hands in a basin. "Lost a lot of blood, and that gash on his side will scar ugly, but nothing vital was hit. Pure luck, really. Another inch to the left and we'd be planning a funeral." "What about the others?" Elias asked. "Jenny Williams has a broken rib and some bad bruising. Michael Chen's got a concussion that worries me, but he's young and strong. They'll recover, physically anyway. Mentally." The doctor trailed off, drying his hands. What they went through out there, the crash, the shooting, surviving in the desert, that leaves marks that don't show up on examination tables. Elias knew that truth intimately. His own scars, visible and invisible, told the same story. "Can I talk to him?" Elias nodded toward Caleb. "He's sedated. Won't be coherent for a few hours. But you can sit if you want. Sometimes people know when someone's keeping vigil. Helps them fight their way back." The doctor left to check on his other patients. Elias moved closer to the table, studied Caleb's face. Without the desperation and fear that had marked it for days, he looked younger. Maybe 32. Maybe less. Too young to have seen what he'd seen. But then, nobody was ever old enough for that. The door opened. Miss Carter stepped in, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She'd cleaned up since the confrontation, changed clothes, washed the dust from her face, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything that had happened. "I brought food," she said, unwrapping the bundle. "Bread, cheese, some dried meat." "Figured you hadn't eaten." She was right. Elias couldn't remember his last real meal. The porridge in the cell had been days ago, though it felt like years. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of Caleb's unconscious form. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp. Simple food, but it tasted like hope. "Marshal Hendricks is taking statements," Miss Carter said eventually. Half the town showed up. People who were too scared to speak before, suddenly they can't stop talking. It's like someone opened a floodgate. Fear works that way. Once it breaks, the relief comes out as words. "He arrested William an hour ago. Not for Marcus's crimes. He says he needs more evidence for that, but for obstruction and witness intimidation. Something about threatening me in front of witnesses." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You pressed charges?" "Samuel Briggs did. Said he heard William threaten me with consequences, and in the territorial code that counts as criminal intimidation." She smiled, small and bitter. "Turns out when you actually enforce the law equally, even powerful men can be held accountable. Who knew? It won't stick long term. William will hire lawyers from Denver, maybe even further east. They'll find technicalities, procedural errors. Rich men don't stay in jail." "Maybe not. But right now, tonight, he's in a cell, the same cell you were in yesterday, and everyone in Copperwood knows it." She took another bite of bread, chewed thoughtfully. "That changes something. Maybe not everything, but something." They finished eating. Miss Carter gathered the cloth, stood to leave, then paused. "What you said before about not knowing if any of this was worth it. Do you really not know?" Elias looked at Caleb's sleeping form. "I know 4 people are dead who'd be alive if I'd ridden through town without stopping. No families are mourning tonight because I couldn't let injustice slide. So yeah, I really don't know. Those people chose to stand up, chose to go to Silver Creek. They made decisions knowing the risks. Did they? Or did I inspire them to make decisions they weren't equipped for? There's a difference between courage and being manipulated into danger by someone who survived worse." Miss Carter sat back down. You think you manipulated them. I think I represented a possibility they'd been told didn't exist, that standing up could work, that power could be challenged, and that possibility got them killed. So what's the difference between inspiration and manipulation when the outcome is graves? The difference is intent. You didn't want them dead, you wanted them free. Want doesn't matter, results matter. And the results are 4 bodies in a town that might slide right back into the same patterns once the marshal leaves and the fear fades. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sounds of Copperwood adjusting to its new reality drifted through the window. Raised voices, but not angry ones. People organizing, planning, taking ownership of structures that had always been controlled from above. My cousin sent word back from Silver Creek, Miss Carter said. The newspaper there is running the story, sending copies to Denver, to the territorial capital. She says other papers are picking it up. What happened here, it's not staying here. Good. Harder for William to bury it if it's already spread. She also said there are rumors. About you. About Captain Boone who deserted during the war. About things you did after. Elias had known this was coming. Always knew the past would catch up eventually. What kind of things? The deputy in Arizona. They say you shot him during an arrest. Say it was murder. They'd be wrong. It was self-defense, but I didn't stick around for a trial, so self-defense and murder look the same in the official records. What really happened? Elias leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The memories came reluctantly, dragged up from a place he tried not to visit. I was passing through a mining camp in Arizona Territory. Heard about a foreman beating his workers, keeping them in debt through company store prices. Familiar story. I made some noise, asked some questions. The deputy, fellow named Crow, came to arrest me for disturbing the peace. Said I was inciting unrest, threatening the economic stability of the camp. He paused, seeing it play out again in his memory. Crow was dirty, on the foreman's payroll. He didn't plan to take me to jail, planned to take me into the desert and put a bullet in me where nobody would find the body. I figured that out about 3 miles outside camp when he drew his gun instead of his handcuffs. So I drew faster, shot him through the shoulder, took his horse, ran, and left him alive. He was still breathing when I rode away. Don't know if he made it back to camp or bled out in the desert. Either way, the warrant says murder, and I've been running from it ever since. Miss Carter processed that. You could have stayed, explained what happened. A jury might have believed you. A jury of miners depended on the foreman for work? In a camp where the law was bought and paid for? I'd have been convicted before the trial started. So I ran. Been running for 12 years now. Different names sometimes, different trades, but always moving, always one step ahead of whoever's looking. That's not living, that's just surviving. Sometimes that's all you get. The conversation died. Caleb stirred on the table, mumbled something incoherent, then settled back into drugged sleep. Miss Carter stood, moved to the window. Marshal Hendricks asked about you. Wanted to know if you'd be around for questioning. What did you tell him? That you'd be at the boarding house. But... She turned to face him. You're not going to be there, are you? You're going to run again. Elias didn't answer immediately. He'd been asking himself the same question since the marshal arrived. Stay and face the consequences of his past, or slip away while everyone was distracted and keep running. I don't know yet, he finally said. If you leave, people will think you were guilty. Think the stories about you are true. People will think what they think regardless. Truth and perception don't always line up. But if you stay, if you face it, you might actually get justice. The marshal seems fair. The territorial courts aren't like some local camp jury. Maybe. Or maybe I end up hanged for a crime I didn't commit because the paperwork says I'm guilty, and paperwork is what courts trust. Miss Carter crossed her arms. So you'd rather run forever than take the chance that the system might actually work? The system, Elias said, voice harder than he intended, hasn't worked for me once in 15 years. Every time I've trusted it, every time I've believed justice was possible, I've ended up disappointed or nearly dead. So yeah, I'm skeptical about staking my life on the hope that this time will be different. Then why did you fight so hard for it here? Why push for trials and evidence and legal process if you don't believe any of it works? Because it might work for other people. For Caleb, for you, for everyone in this town who hasn't burned through all their second chances. Just because the system failed me doesn't mean I want it to fail everyone. The logic was twisted, even to his own ears. But it was the truth. He'd become a kind of living contradiction, a man who fought for justice while believing justice was impossible, who protected legal process while avoiding it himself, who inspired others to stand up while planning his own escape. Miss Carter seemed to sense his internal conflict. She moved closer, spoke softly. "You're tired, I can see it. Not just physically, tired in your soul. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of caring about places you can't stay in and people you can't protect." That obvious? To anyone who's paying attention, you've got the look of someone who's done too much for too long. She paused. What would it take for you to stop? To actually rest instead of just surviving? Elias thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe for the first time in years. I don't know. Absolution, maybe. Some kind of proof that the running was worth it. That the fights I picked mattered. That I didn't just leave a trail of bodies and broken towns behind me while telling myself I was helping. You did help. Here, at least. You helped a lot. Did I? Or did I just speed up a process that would have happened anyway? Maybe Copperwood would have risen up against the Crowleys eventually. Maybe I just made it bloodier and faster. Or maybe it never would have happened. Maybe people would have stayed scared forever, and the Crowleys would have kept grinding them down generation after generation. Miss Carter sat on the edge of Caleb's table. You can't know which version is true. None of us can. But I choose to believe you made a difference. Choose to believe that sometimes one person standing up gives everyone else permission to do the same. That's a nice thought. It's more than a thought. It's what happened. I was there. I saw it. Elias wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that his presence had catalyzed something genuine and lasting. But belief required faith, and faith required hope. And hope was a resource he'd exhausted somewhere between Arizona and here. The door opened again. Marshal Hendricks stepped in, hat in hand, expression serious. Mr. Boone, glad I found you. We need to talk. About Arizona. Among other things. The marshal pulled up another chair, sat. I sent some telegrams this afternoon. Made some inquiries about your history. Got some interesting responses. Elias braced himself. Here it came, the arrest, the extradition, the end of running culminating in a noose. Turns out, Hendricks continued, Deputy Crow survived. Took him 3 days to crawl back to camp, and by then infection had set in. Lost the arm you shot, but he lived. And here's the interesting part. 2 years later, he was arrested for murder. Different case, different victim. But during his trial, he confessed to taking bribes. Admitted he'd been hired to kill people who caused trouble for the mining companies. Admitted you were one of his targets. Elias felt something shift in his chest. He admitted it? In sworn testimony. It's in the court records, which means the warrant for your arrest in Arizona was based on false pretenses. You weren't a murderer. You were defending yourself against an attempted murder. The charges were dropped posthumously after Crow was hanged for his actual crimes. Posthumously. Meaning I'm clear? In Arizona, yes. As for the desertion charge, Hendricks pulled out a folded document. That's more complicated. Technically, desertion during wartime is still a capital offense, but the war ended 15 years ago, and the Army's got bigger problems than chasing down every soldier who walked away. I talked to a judge I know in Denver. He says if you're willing to testify in the Crowley case, provide evidence and witness statements, he can probably get the desertion charge reduced to time served or dismissed on grounds of extenuating circumstances. Elias stared at him. You're saying I'm free? I'm saying you could be. If you stay. If you help build the case against William Crowley. If you stop running long enough to let the system actually work for you instead of against you. It was too good. Too convenient. Had to be a trap or a trick or some kind of... Why? Elias asked. Why would you help me? Hendricks leaned back, considering. Because I've been doing this job for 23 years, seen a lot of men in that time. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. And I've learned to recognize the ones who are running from their mistakes versus the ones who are running from injustice. You're the second kind, and I'm tired of seeing those men destroyed by a system that should be protecting them. You don't know me, don't know what I've done. I know enough. I know you stood up in Copperwood when it would have been easier to walk away. I know you risked your life for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I know 4 people died, but dozens more didn't because you were here. That counts for something in my book." Miss Carter had been listening quietly. Now she spoke up. "If he stays, if he testifies, William's lawyers will tear him apart. They'll use his past against him, make him look unreliable." "Maybe," Hendricks admitted. "But they'll have to explain why an unreliable witness was able to predict exactly what evidence would be found in Marcus Crowley's ledgers. They'll have to explain how a drifter nobody knew managed to uncover a criminal operation that had been running for years under everyone's noses. Sometimes the truth is strong enough to survive cross-examination." Elias looked at Caleb's unconscious form, at Miss Carter, standing there with hope written across her face, at the marshal, offering something Elias had thought impossible, a way forward that didn't involve running. "I need to think about it," Elias said. "Fair enough. But don't think too long. William's lawyers are already filing motions, and the window for your testimony being useful is maybe a week. After that, the case gets complicated, and your cooperation matters less." Hendricks stood, placed a card on the table. "That's where I'm staying. Come find me when you've decided." He left. Miss Carter picked up the card, read it, set it down. "You're going to say yes," she said, not a question. "Am I?" "You are. Because for all your talk about not believing in the system, you actually do. You believe in it enough to fight for it, which means you believe in it enough to trust it. At least this once. That's a lot of assumptions." "They're not assumptions. They're observations. I've been watching you for days now, Boone. Watching how you move, how you talk, how you make decisions. You're not a cynic. You're an optimist who's been disappointed too many times. But the optimism is still there, buried under all the scars and the running, and it's telling you to stay." Elias wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways she was wrong, all the reasons staying was stupid and dangerous and likely to end badly. But he couldn't, because she was right. Somewhere under all the accumulated damage and defensive pessimism, he still believed things could be better, still believed fighting was worth it, still believed, despite everything, that justice was possible. "Maybe I'll stay," he said quietly. "Maybe?" "Probably. Ask me tomorrow, when I'm not exhausted and half-starved and emotionally compromised by watching people almost die." Miss Carter smiled, genuine this time, warm. "Tomorrow then, but I'm holding you to it." She left. Elias sat alone with Caleb, listening to the younger man breathe. The room darkened as evening settled over Copperwood. Through the window, lights appeared in buildings, lamps being lit, fires being started, the daily rhythm of a town that was learning to exist without fear. Doc Pritchard returned around sunset, checked Caleb's bandages, pronounced him stable. "You planning to sleep here?" the doctor asked. "Might as well. Don't have anywhere else to be." "Suit yourself. There's a cot in the back room if you need it. And help yourself to whatever's in the kitchen. I don't keep much, but there's coffee and some canned goods." Elias found the cot, lay down. Sleep came easier than expected, dragging him under into dreams that were less nightmares than memories. The war, the desertion, the years of running, but also the moments in between, the times he'd helped someone, stopped something bad, made even a small difference. He woke to voices. Caleb was awake, talking to someone. Elias sat up, moved to the doorway. Caleb's wife sat beside the examination table, holding her husband's hand. 2 little girls, maybe 6 and 8, stood nearby, looking scared but relieved. The older one was crying quietly. The younger one was trying to be brave, failing. Caleb saw Elias, tried to sit up, winced from the pain. "Easy," Elias said. "You've got stitches that won't appreciate sudden movements." "Boone, you're still here." "For now." Caleb's wife, Sarah, Elias remembered, stood and approached him. She was small, thin from too many missed meals, but there was steel in her eyes. "You're the one who helped my husband." "I'm the one who got him shot at and nearly killed, yes." "No." Her voice was firm. "You're the one who gave him hope, gave us hope. We were drowning before you came. Slowly, quietly, but drowning. And you threw us a rope. The fact that using it was dangerous doesn't change the fact that it was there." She hugged him. It was awkward. Elias wasn't used to gratitude, wasn't used to physical affection from strangers. But he accepted it, let her cry into his shoulder for a moment before she pulled away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Whatever happens next, whatever comes, thank you for giving my family a chance." She returned to Caleb's side. The two girls climbed onto the table carefully, curling up beside their father. The family unit, damaged but intact, holding each other like they were afraid to let go. Elias stepped outside, needing air. The night was cool, stars bright overhead. Copperwood looked different in the darkness, smaller, more fragile. A collection of wooden structures and desperate hopes, trying to survive in a desert that didn't care. He walked to the jail. It sat empty now. William was being held in the marshal's custody at the boarding house under armed guard. The cell where Elias had been locked stood open, door swinging slightly in the breeze. He stepped inside, sat on the bench, tried to imagine staying in Copperwood long term, testifying at trials, building a life in a place that knew his name and history. It felt impossible. Every instinct screamed at him to saddle his horse and ride before the walls closed in again. But another part, quieter, less practiced, whispered that maybe this was the chance to stop running, to face the past and see if redemption was actually possible or just a story people told themselves. Footsteps outside. Sheriff Daniels appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Heard you were wandering. Figured I'd find you here." "Old habits. I've spent time in a lot of cells. They're familiar." Daniels sat on the floor, back against the wall. "I resigned this afternoon. Gave the badge to Marshal Hendricks, told him I wasn't fit to wear it anymore." "He accept it?" "Said he'd think about it. Said sometimes the men who feel most unfit are the ones who should be serving. But I don't know. I can't look at myself in the mirror without seeing every compromise I made, every time I looked the other way. That's called a conscience. It's uncomfortable, but it means you're still human. Doesn't feel like much of an achievement, being barely human." They sat in silence for a while. Two men who'd made different choices but ended up in similar places, carrying weight they couldn't put down, haunted by decisions they couldn't undo. "What are you going to do?" Daniels finally asked. "Marshall offered me a deal, testify against William, and my past gets cleared. Or mostly cleared." "You going to take it?" "Don't know yet. Part of me says yes, part of me says it's a trap, and part of me is just too tired to care either way." "For what it's worth," Daniels said, "I think you should stay. Town's going to need people who aren't afraid to stand up. And you're the only person I've seen in 15 years who actually did it and survived." Survived is a generous word. I'm sitting in an empty jail cell having a philosophical crisis with a former sheriff. That's not winning. But you're alive. And the Crowleys are finished. And Copperwood has a chance to be something better. That's more winning than most people manage. Daniel stood, brushed dust from his pants. "Think about it. And if you decide to stay, know that there are folks here who'd stand with you. Not because we're brave, but because you showed us what bravery looks like." He left. Elias remained in the cell, thinking. The night deepened. Somewhere in town, people were celebrating, cautious celebration, aware that danger wasn't completely past, but willing to acknowledge that something significant had shifted. Elias could hear music drifting from the saloon. Laughter. The sounds of a community remembering how to hope. He thought about all the towns he'd passed through, all the fights he'd picked and abandoned, all the people he'd helped briefly before moving on, never seeing whether his intervention lasted or faded. This could be different, could be the place where he finally stopped running, where he faced his past and built something resembling a future. It was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. Dawn found him still sitting in the cell, no closer to a decision. But he hadn't left, hadn't saddled his horse and disappeared into the desert. That had to count for something. Miss Carter appeared with breakfast, real breakfast this time, eggs and bacon and fresh bread. She handed it through the bars like he was still a prisoner, then sat on the floor outside the cell. "Marshall's leaving tomorrow," she said. "Taking William to Denver to face charges. He needs your answer before he goes." "I know. Have you decided?" "No. But I'm leaning toward yes, which is more than I thought I'd be." "What's holding you back?" Elias ate some eggs, thought about how to answer. "Fear, mostly. Fear that if I stay, I'll mess it up, get people killed again. Or worse, I'll settle in, start caring about this place, and then watch it slide back into the same patterns. Watch everything we fought for dissolve because changing systems is harder than changing people who run them. That might happen. Probably will happen, at least partially. Change is never clean or permanent, but that doesn't mean it's not worth attempting. Doesn't it? If the outcome is the same either way, if Copperwood ends up controlled by someone like William, just with a different name, then what's the point of the struggle? Miss Carter set down her coffee, looked at him directly. The point is that we tried. The point is that for however long it lasts, a year, a decade, a generation, people will have lived with more freedom and less fear. And maybe they'll remember what that felt like. Maybe they'll fight harder the next time someone tries to take it away. That's how change actually happens. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small victories that build on each other. That's a more optimistic view than I can manage. Then let me be optimistic for both of us. You've carried the weight of fighting alone for too long. Stay, and maybe you won't have to fight alone anymore. Elias finished his breakfast, handed the empty plate back through the bars. The symbolism wasn't lost on him, accepting help through the bars of a cell he'd chosen to sit in. "All right," he said. "I'll stay. I'll testify. I'll do whatever the marshal needs, but I'm not making promises about the long term. We get through the trial, see what happens after, and I reserve the right to disappear if things go sideways." Miss Carter smiled. "That's the least committal commitment I've ever heard, but I'll take it." She left to tell the marshal. Elias remained in the cell for another hour, then finally stood and walked out. The door hung open, unlocked, offering freedom he'd been too paralyzed to take. He found Marshal Hendricks at the boarding house, organizing documents. "I'm in," Elias said. "Whatever you need, I'll provide it." Hendricks looked up from his papers, nodded. "Good. We've got a lot of work to do. The Crowley lawyers are already filing motions to suppress evidence, claims the ledgers were obtained illegally. We need to document everything, chain of custody, witness statements, timeline of events. Your testimony will be critical to establishing context." "When do we start?" "Now. We've got maybe 5 days before the preliminary hearing. After that, the real trial could take months. You prepared for that kind of timeline?" "No, but I'll manage." They worked through the day. Elias gave a detailed statement, everything from the moment he arrived in Copperwood to the confrontation with William. The marshal asked pointed questions, poked holes in the narrative, forced Elias to be more specific about times and locations and exact words spoken. It was exhausting, dredging up memories, reliving decisions, justifying actions that at the time had felt instinctive but in retrospect seemed reckless. By evening, they had 20 pages of testimony. Hendricks read through it, made notes, asked for clarifications on a few points. "This is good," he said finally, detailed, consistent, corroborated by other witnesses. "The defense will attack your credibility because of your past, but the facts support you. That's what matters in court." "You really think this will work? That William will actually face consequences?" "I think we've got a strong case. Whether that translates to conviction depends on the jury, the judge, a dozen variables I can't control. But we've got a chance, better than even odds if I'm reading things right." Better than even odds. Not certainty, but possibility. That was all anyone could ever really hope for. Elias spent that night at the boarding house, in the same room he'd rented when he first arrived. Mrs. Henderson had kept it available, changed the sheets, put fresh water in the pitcher. The small kindnesses of a woman who understood that sometimes coming back was harder than leaving. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 15 years he allowed himself to imagine staying somewhere, putting down roots, building relationships that lasted longer than a week or a month. It was terrifying. It was tempting. It might actually be possible. Morning came with a knock at the door. Miss Carter again, this time with news. "Caleb's awake and coherent. He's asking for you." Elias followed her to the doctor's office. Caleb was sitting up in bed, color returned to his face, eyes clear. His daughter sat on either side of him, drawing pictures on scraps of paper. "Boone." Caleb extended his hand. Elias shook it carefully, mindful of the bandages. "I hear you're staying. For the trial, at least. After that, we'll see. Sarah told me what you did. Breaking out of jail to stop the shooting, negotiating with William. You saved lives. Not enough of them. No, but some. And in a world where most people save none, some is significant." Caleb paused. I've been thinking about what happens next. After the trial, after William's dealt with. The town's going to need leadership. Real leadership, not the kind bought with fear and money. You offering? Thinking about it. Marshall Hendricks says there'll be elections once things stabilize. Fair elections. And people are talking about nominating me. I don't know if I'm qualified, but you are, Elias said. You stood up when it mattered. That's the only qualification that counts. I stood up because you showed me it was possible. And now you'll show other people. That's how it spreads. They talked for another hour about the trial, about Copperwood's future, about the practical work of rebuilding trust and structures after corruption. Caleb had ideas. Good ideas. The kind that came from living in the system, understanding its flaws from the inside. Elias felt something unfamiliar, confidence in someone else. The belief that maybe, just maybe, the work he'd started would continue after he left. That the victory wouldn't be temporary. He spent the next 3 days preparing for the trial, reviewing testimony, meeting with other witnesses, helping Miss Carter organize the documentation that would support their case. The work was tedious but necessary, each detail another brick in the wall they were building against William's defense. On the 4th day, Marshall Hendricks gathered everyone who'd be testifying. The preliminary hearing is tomorrow, he said. This is where the judge decides if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. William's lawyers will argue there isn't. Our job is to prove them wrong. Be honest, be clear, and don't let them rattle you. Remember, we're not trying to convince them William's guilty. We're just trying to show there's enough evidence that a jury should hear the case. The next morning, they rode to Silver Creek, the nearest town with a proper courthouse. Elias, Caleb, Miss Carter, Samuel Briggs, and a dozen others who'd witnessed events or been victims of the Crowley operation. Marshall Hendricks led the group, projecting calm confidence, even though Elias could see the tension in his shoulders. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building, imposing and formal. Inside, William Crowley sat at the defense table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked diminished somehow, without his empire around him. Without the fear that had always preceded his presence, he was just a man in his 60s facing consequences. His eyes found Elias. The hatred there was pure and absolute. This wasn't business anymore. It was personal. The judge entered. A woman in her 50s named Thornton, with sharp eyes and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She called the court to order, and the hearing began. The prosecution went first. Marshall Hendricks presented the ledgers, walking through entries, explaining the pattern of fraud and extortion. He called Caleb to testify about the rigged poker game, called Miss Carter to discuss the intimidation and threats, called Samuel Briggs to describe the wagon accident and his brother's death. Each testimony built on the others, creating a narrative of systematic corruption enforced through violence and fear. Then it was Elias's turn. He took the stand, swore the oath, sat. William's lead lawyer, a man named Patterson from Denver, approached with the confidence of someone who'd won 100 cases just like this. Mr. Boone, Patterson began, or should I say Captain Boone, or perhaps just Fugitive. You have so many names it's hard to keep track. Elias Boone is fine. How generous. Now, Mr. Boone, you're a wanted man, are you not? Wanted for desertion, wanted for questioning in a deputy's shooting. Would you say you have a history of running from legal authority? I have a history of surviving corrupt legal authority. There's a difference. Is there? Or is that just how you justify breaking laws that inconvenience you? Elias kept his voice level. I followed the law when the law was just. When it wasn't, I made different choices. Same as any person with a conscience would. Patterson smiled like he'd scored a point. A conscience, how noble! And this conscience of yours led you to break into private property, steal documents, and incite violence that resulted in multiple deaths. That's quite a conscience. I didn't incite violence. I exposed crimes. Crimes you claim happened, based on documents you stole, without any verification or due process. For all we know, you manufactured this entire narrative to justify your own criminal behavior. Marshall Hendricks stood. Objection, Mr. Boone didn't manufacture Marcus Crowley's handwriting. Multiple witnesses have verified the ledgers are genuine. Sustained, Judge Thornton said. Mr. Patterson, stick to relevant questions. Patterson nodded, unfazed. Very well. Mr. Boone, you arrived in Copperwood with no prior connection to the town or its residents. What exactly motivated you to get involved in local affairs? I saw injustice. I responded to it. How heroic. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity. Perhaps you thought a wealthy man like William Crowley could be extorted, blackmailed. Perhaps this whole thing was a scheme to extract money through manufactured scandal. If I wanted money, I'd have taken the $300 Marcus Crowley stole from Caleb McBride. It was right there in the lockbox. I left it. Or so you claim. The questioning continued for 2 hours. Patterson attacked every aspect of Elias's testimony, his credibility, his motives. He painted him as a drifter with a savior complex who'd manipulated desperate people into dangerous actions. Some of it was effective. Some of it probably resonated with the judge. But through it all, Elias held to the facts. Marcus's ledgers were real. The crimes were documented in the criminal's own hand. Whatever Elias's past, whatever his motivations, the evidence existed independent of him. Finally, Patterson sat down. Hendricks had no redirect questions. The testimony was complete. Judge Thornton reviewed her notes, looked at the assembled witnesses, studied the ledgers. I'll make my ruling tomorrow morning, she said. Court adjourned. They filed out. Elias felt drained, hollowed out. The public dissection of his character, the relentless focus on his worst moments, it had taken more out of him than he'd expected. Miss Carter found him outside, sitting on the courthouse steps. You did well in there. I got torn apart. You held your ground. That's what matters. And the judge was paying attention. I saw her face when Patterson tried to claim you fabricated the ledgers. She didn't buy it. Hope you're right. They stayed in Silver Creek that night. The group rented rooms at a small hotel, ate dinner together at a restaurant that served passable steak and decent whiskey. The mood was cautious. Nobody wanted to celebrate before they knew the outcome. Elias sat at the bar after dinner, nursing a drink. Caleb joined him, moving carefully, still favoring his injured side. Win or lose tomorrow, Caleb said. I want you to know this mattered. What we did, what we tried to build, it mattered. We'll see if the judge agrees. I'm not talking about the judge, I'm talking about us, the people of Copperwood. We found our voices because you showed us they existed. That doesn't go away regardless of the ruling. Elias wanted to believe that, wanted to accept that the intangibles, courage, hope, solidarity, were more important than legal outcomes. But he'd seen too many cases where the intangibles dissolved the moment power reasserted itself. Morning came too fast. They returned to the courthouse, filed into the gallery. Judge Thornton entered exactly at 9 o'clock. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony, she began. This court finds that sufficient probable cause exists to proceed to trial on charges of fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit murder. Mr. Crowley will be remanded to custody pending trial. Bail is set at $50,000. The gallery erupted. Some cheering, some shocked. William Crowley's face went white. His lawyers immediately started filing objections, demanding appeals. But the ruling stood. There would be a trial. William would face a jury. Justice, actual justice, was possible. Elias felt something break loose in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Or just exhausted gratitude that for once the system had worked the way it was supposed to. Outside, Marshal Hendricks gathered the group. This is just the beginning, he warned. The trial could take months. William's lawyers will fight every step. And even if we win, there's appeals and technicalities. This isn't over. But it started, Miss Carter said. That's what matters. It's actually started. They rode back to Copperwood that afternoon. The town had heard the news. Someone had ridden ahead with word. People lined the street, applauding as the group returned. Not a triumphant celebration, but quiet acknowledgement. We did this. Together. We actually did this. Elias returned to the boarding house, climbed to his room, sat on the bed and let the exhaustion finally claim him. He'd stayed. He'd testified. He'd faced his past enough to give Copperwood a future. And tomorrow, he'd decide whether to keep staying or to ride west like he'd always done. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, he let himself rest without planning his next escape. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony, cross-examination, legal maneuvering, and the slow grinding machinery of justice processing William Crowley's empire one crime at a time. Elias attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Caleb and Miss Carter and the others who'd fought to make this moment possible. Some days felt like victory. The prosecution would present evidence so damning that even William's expensive lawyers couldn't explain it away. Ledger entries in Marcus's handwriting, witness after witness describing extortion and violence, financial records showing illegal interest rates and fraudulent dealings. Other days felt like defeat. The defense would parade character witnesses who swore William was a pillar of the community, a job creator, a man who'd built Copperwood from nothing. They'd attack the credibility of prosecution witnesses, point out inconsistencies in testimony, suggest that Marcus had operated independently without his father's knowledge. The jury, 12 men and women from Silver Creek and surrounding towns, listened to it all with faces that gave nothing away. Farmers, shopkeepers, a school teacher, a widow who ran a boarding house. Regular people trying to decide if a powerful man could actually be held accountable. Elias testified 3 times. Each time, William's lawyers attacked his past, his credibility, his motives. Each time, he held to the simple truth. He'd witnessed crimes and reported them. Everything else was noise. On the 42nd day, both sides rested. The judge gave instructions to the jury. They filed out to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Hours stretched like days. Elias paced the courthouse lawn, unable to sit still. Caleb sat under a tree with his wife and daughters, telling them stories to pass the time. Miss Carter stood at the courthouse steps, watching the door like she could will a verdict into existence through sheer determination. Marshal Hendricks smoked a cigar, outwardly calm, but his hands betrayed him. Constant motion, adjusting his hat, checking his pocket watch, fidgeting with the badge he still wore. "How long do you think?" Elias asked him. "Could be hours, could be days." Long deliberation usually means disagreement. Could go either way. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. This is the part where we're powerless. Everything we could do, we did. Now it's up to 12 people we don't know to decide if any of it mattered. The sun was setting when the courthouse door opened. A clerk appeared, called out that the jury had reached a verdict. They filed back inside. The gallery packed with people, Copperwood residents who'd made the 20-mile journey to see justice done or denied. The air was thick with tension and hope and dread. William Crowley sat at the defense table, face expressionless. But Elias could see his hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white. The jury foreman stood, a weathered farmer in his 50s named Hutchins. "On the charge of fraud in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." The word landed like a hammer. The gallery stirred. William's lawyers immediately started whispering urgently to each other. "On the charge of extortion? Guilty." "On the charge of witness intimidation? Guilty." Charge after charge, guilty after guilty. The jury had convicted on every count except one, conspiracy to commit murder. On that charge, they'd found the evidence insufficient to prove William had directly ordered the wagon accident or the attacks on Caleb's group. It was enough. More than enough. Judge Thornton banged her gavel as the gallery erupted. "Order! I will have order in this court." The noise subsided. She turned to William. "Mr. Crowley, you have been found guilty of multiple serious crimes. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Until then, you will remain in custody. Bail is revoked." William stood, finally showing emotion. "This is a travesty. These people conspired to destroy me, to take everything I built. You're letting them get away with it." "What I'm letting happen," Judge Thornton said coldly, "is justice. You used your power to exploit and harm people for years. Now you'll face the consequences. Bailiff, remove the defendant." They led William away in chains. He looked back once, eyes finding Elias. The hatred there was profound, but underneath it was something else. Defeat. The recognition that he'd lost not just the trial, but everything that had defined him. Outside, the crowd from Copperwood celebrated. Not wild celebration, too much had been lost for that, but quiet satisfaction. The kind that came from seeing something broken finally get fixed, even partially. Caleb found Elias in the crowd, grabbed his hand. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it. All of you. I just started the conversation. Don't diminish your role. None of this happens without you." Caleb paused, emotional. My daughters are going to grow up in a different town than I did. A better one. That's because you showed us we didn't have to accept how things were. Sarah McBride hugged Elias, tears streaming down her face. Miss Carter stood nearby, smiling through her own tears. Samuel Briggs clapped him on the shoulder. Even Sheriff Daniels, who'd attended the trial every day despite no longer wearing a badge, shook his hand with something like respect. Marshal Hendricks approached, cigar lit, looking satisfied. Hell of a case. Hell of an outcome. The judge is talking about 15 to 20 years, maybe more with the aggravating factors. William Crowley's going to die in prison. Good, Elias said, and meant it. They returned to Copperwood that evening. The town had transformed in the 6 weeks since the arrest. Without William's influence, without the fear that had kept people compliant, the community had started reorganizing itself. Fair elections for sheriff had been held. Daniels had run reluctantly and won by a landslide, sworn to actually serve justice this time. The mine workers had formed a union, negotiated better wages and safety conditions. The lumberyard had been sold to a cooperative of workers who'd been employed there. Change was happening. Messy, imperfect, but real. Elias spent the next few days helping Caleb prepare for his own election campaign. The town needed a mayor, a real one, elected fairly, accountable to the people. Caleb was the obvious choice, though he kept insisting he wasn't qualified. Nobody's qualified, Elias told him during one of their planning sessions. You just have to be willing to try and honest enough to admit when you're wrong. You've got both of those. What about you? Caleb asked. You should run for something. Town council, at least. People trust you. People trust the idea of me. The reality would disappoint them. I don't believe that. Believe it. I'm not good at staying put, Caleb. Not good at the daily grind of making things work. I'm better at breaking things that need breaking and moving on before I have to help rebuild. So you're leaving. It wasn't a question. Caleb had seen it coming, same as everyone else. Eventually, not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Caleb nodded, sad but understanding. Where will you go? Don't know yet. Wherever the next fight is, I suppose. 2 weeks later, they returned to Silver Creek for William Crowley's sentencing. Judge Thornton had reviewed the evidence, the victim impact statements, the arguments from both sides. She looked tired. The trial had taken its toll on everyone involved. Mr. Crowley, she began, you were found guilty of systematically exploiting the people who depended on you for their livelihoods. You used your economic power to coerce, defraud, and intimidate. While the jury did not find sufficient evidence to convict you of murder, the pattern of behavior suggests a willingness to use violence when other methods failed. William stood silent, face like stone. This court sentences you to 18 years in the territorial prison. You will serve a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, all assets obtained through illegal means will be forfeited and distributed to your victims as restitution. Your business holdings will be sold at public auction, with proceeds going to the Territorial Treasury and Victim Compensation Fund. 18 years. At William's age, it was effectively a life sentence. His lawyers filed immediate appeals, but everyone knew they were futile gestures. The conviction was solid, the evidence overwhelming. William Crowley's reign over Copperwood and everything he'd built was finished. They led him away. This time he didn't look back. The restitution process took another month. Every person Marcus had cheated, every family William had exploited, every worker who'd been underpaid, they filed claims, presented evidence, received compensation. It wasn't perfect. Some people got more than they deserved, others less. But it was something. A recognition that they'd been wronged and deserved amends. Caleb's family received their $300, plus additional compensation for the suffering they'd endured. Sarah cried when she held the money, not from joy but from relief. Her daughters would eat regularly. They could afford medicine if someone got sick. They had a future that didn't involve constant desperation. Miss Carter used her settlement to buy the general store from its previous owner, one of William's cronies who'd fled town when the verdict came down. She renamed it Carter's Mercantile and ran it with fair prices and honest dealings. Within weeks, it became the heart of Copperwood's new economy. Samuel Briggs took his compensation and invested it in expanding the mine's safety equipment. His brother's death wouldn't be in vain. He'd make sure future workers had better protection, better conditions, better chances of coming home alive. The town slowly healed. Not completely. Grief doesn't work that way. But the wound scabbed over, scar tissue formed. People learned to carry their losses while still moving forward. Elias watched it all from a distance, helping where he could but mostly observing. This was their town now, their future to build. He'd played his part. Time for others to play theirs. One evening, 6 weeks after the sentencing, he was packing his saddlebags when Miss Carter knocked on his door. "So it's really happening. You're leaving." "Tomorrow morning, early." She sat on the edge of his bed, watching him organize his belongings. The Winchester, cleaned and oiled, extra ammunition, dried food for the trail, the small collection of possessions that defined a life lived in motion. "Where to?" "Got a telegram 3 days ago. Town called Redemption Springs, about 200 miles south. They're having trouble with a land speculator who's forcing people off their claims through legal technicalities and hired muscle. Asked if I'd be willing to come look into it." "And you said yes." "I said I'd think about it. Then I thought about it. And here we are." Miss Carter was quiet for a moment. "You know you could stay. Copperwood needs people like you. I need—" She stopped herself. "We could use someone who's not afraid to stand up when things get difficult again." "You don't need me. You've got Caleb, Samuel, Daniels. You've got each other. That's stronger than any one person. But you're the one who showed us how to be strong." "No. I showed you that strength was possible. You did the actual being strong part." Elias sat beside her. "I'm not good at this, Carter. Not good at staying, at building, at being part of something permanent. I get restless. Start seeing threats that aren't there, picking fights that don't need picking. Better for everyone if I move on before I cause more harm than good." "You really believe that?" "I do." She leaned against his shoulder. Not romantic, just the comfort of human contact, of connection before separation. "We're naming the school after you. The town council voted yesterday. It'll be called the Elias Boone Schoolhouse. So children will learn to read and write in a building named for the man who taught us to stand up." Elias felt something crack in his chest. "I didn't do anything worth that kind of honor." "You did everything worth it. And whether you accept it or not, you'll be remembered here. Not as some perfect hero, but as a flawed man who did the right thing when it mattered." They sat in silence until the last of the daylight faded. Then Miss Carter stood, kissed his forehead, and left without another word. Elias finished packing, lay down on the bed one last time, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd ride south toward another town, another fight, another chance to maybe make a small difference. The pattern would continue, had been continuing for 15 years, until age or violence or just plain exhaustion finally stopped him. But tonight, in this room, in this town that had cost so much and won so much, he let himself feel something other than the constant drive to move. Let himself feel satisfied, proud even. Not of himself necessarily, but of what they'd all accomplished together. Morning came cold and clear. Elias dressed, checked his gear one final time, and led his horse out of the livery stable. The sun was just breaking the horizon, painting Copperwood in shades of gold and amber. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Caleb and his family, Miss Carter, Samuel Briggs, Sheriff Daniels, Doc Pritchard, Jenny Williams and Michael Chen both recovered from their injuries, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, 30 or 40 others, people whose names he'd learned, whose stories he'd heard, whose lives had intersected with his for this brief, violent, transformative moment. He mounted the gray mare, settling into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath him, ready to run, always ready to run. "Thank you," Caleb said simply, "for everything." Elias nodded. Words felt inadequate. What could he say that would encompass everything that had happened? The deaths, the victories, the small acts of courage that had added up to revolution? "Take care of each other," he finally managed. "That's what matters. Not what I did or didn't do, but what you do next. Keep standing up. Keep fighting when fighting's necessary. Keep building something worth protecting." "We will," Miss Carter promised. "And if you ever need a place to rest, a place to stop running, you'll always have a home here." Home. The word felt foreign, aspirational. But maybe someday, when he was too old or too damaged to keep moving, he'd come back. Test whether the promise held up against the reality. Maybe. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then turned the mare south. She moved into an easy trot, then a canter, eating up the distance between Copperwood and wherever came next. Elias didn't look back. Never looked back. The past was for remembering, not revisiting, but he carried Copperwood with him, in the ache of old bruises, in the memory of Caleb's daughters drawing pictures while their father recovered, in the sound of Miss Carter reading Marcus's crimes aloud, in the image of William Crowley in chains, finally understanding that power had limits. The desert spread out before him, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there was Redemption Springs. Somewhere beyond that was another town, another fight, another chance to matter briefly before moving on. The sun climbed higher, the mare's hooves beat a steady rhythm against packed earth, and Elias Boone rode toward the horizon, carrying his scars and his Winchester and the quiet knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, standing up made a difference. Even if you didn't stay to see it last. 3 months later, a letter arrived in Copperwood addressed to Miss Carter. She opened it at the counter of her mercantile, customers browsing around her. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed, but legible. Carter, Redemption Springs worked out. Land speculators in custody, people got their claims back. Different fight, same story. Makes me think maybe the pattern's bigger than individual towns. Maybe the whole territory is infected with the same corruption, just wearing different faces. I'm heading further south. Heard about a mining operation in the mountains that's using convict labor under brutal conditions. Figure someone should look into that. How's Copperwood? Did Caleb win the election? Is the school finished? Are people still standing up, or has fear crept back in? Don't answer that last question. I'd rather imagine it's still working. Let me have that much hope. Boone. Miss Carter read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her apron pocket. A customer asked about the price of flour. She told them, made the sale, went about her day. But later that evening, she showed the letter to Caleb. He'd won the mayoral election by a landslide and was currently wrestling with the mundane challenges of governance, budget allocations, infrastructure repairs, mediating disputes between neighbors. He's still fighting, Caleb said after reading it. He'll always be fighting. It's who he is. Think he'll ever stop? Ever find peace? Miss Carter thought about that. About the man who'd ridden into their town expecting nothing and given them everything. About the weight he carried, the past that chased him, the restless drive that kept him moving. No, she said. I don't think he will. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the world needs people who can't stop fighting, who see injustice and can't walk past it even when walking past would be easier. Even if it destroys them? Even then. They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, Copperwood continued its evening routine. Children played in the street. The saloon's piano played a cheerful tune. Miners returned from the day shift, no longer dead-eyed with exhaustion, but tired in the normal way of honest work fairly compensated. The school was nearly finished, a solid building with glass windows and proper desks. Above the door, a wooden sign proclaimed it the Elias Boone Schoolhouse. The dedication ceremony was planned for next month. They'd invited Elias, but nobody expected him to show up. He was already somewhere else, fighting someone else's battle, carrying the weight of the world on shoulders that had learned long ago how to bear impossible loads. And in Copperwood, people remembered, told stories, taught their children about the old cowboy who'd turned to face a bully and started a revolution with 2 simple words. My turn. The words echoed across the territory, carrying hope to places that had forgotten what hope looked like. And wherever Elias Boone rode, whatever fights he picked, whatever stands he made, he carried Copperwood with him. Proof that sometimes, against all odds, justice was possible, even in a world designed to prevent it. Years would pass. The territory would become a state. Copperwood would grow, change, face new challenges. Some things would improve. Others would regress. The endless cycle of progress and setback that defined human civilization would continue. But the school would remain. The stories would persist. And somewhere, always somewhere, an old cowboy with a Winchester and too many scars would be standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Because that's what he did. Until the day he couldn't anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The mare crested a ridge, and below Elias could see Redemption Springs spread out like a promise waiting to be kept or broken. He checked his rifle, straightened his hat, and rode down the slope toward whatever came next. Behind him, the sun set over Copperwood. Ahead, the work continued. Always the work. Always the fight. Always the hope that this time, maybe this time, the victory would last.